In the countless worlds that drift through the infinite cosmos, there exists a realm known as Maple World, a place of wonder and magic, of courage and darkness, where the fate of all existence once hung by the thinnest of threads. This is the story of that world's greatest savior and its most terrible destroyer, who were, impossibly, one and the same being. This is the tale of the White Mage, who became the Black Mage, and of the heroes who stood against the encroaching darkness. This is a chronicle spanning centuries of sacrifice and betrayal, of memory and forgetting, of the eternal struggle between light and shadow. Our story begins in an age so ancient that even the elves who live for millennia do not remember it clearly. It begins with a man whose name has been lost to time, but whose title echoes through history: the White Mage, guardian and protector of Maple World. Chapter 1. The Guardian of Light. Long before the modern kingdoms rose, before the great cities were built, before even the oldest trees in EunWol took root, Maple World was a younger, wilder place. Magic flowed freely through the land, untamed and dangerous. Monsters of unimaginable power roamed without check, and the people who lived in scattered villages and small settlements knew fear as their constant companion. It was into this world that the White Mage emerged. Some said he was born of the world itself, spontaneously created by Maple World's desperate need for a guardian. Others whispered that he came from beyond the stars, sent by powers greater than any could comprehend. The truth of his origin remained shrouded in mystery, but his purpose was crystal clear. He was to be the protector of Maple World and all its inhabitants. The White Mage was not merely powerful, he was transcendent. His mastery of light magic surpassed anything seen before or since. With a gesture, he could banish darkness from the land. With a word, he could heal wounds that should have been fatal. With a thought, he could erect barriers that no force could penetrate. He walked the world as a living embodiment of hope, and wherever he went, the people rejoiced. For years beyond counting, the White Mage fulfilled his sacred duty. He battled the great beasts that threatened the settlements. He taught the people how to defend themselves and how to harness the gentler aspects of magic. He established sanctuaries where knowledge could be preserved and wisdom could flourish. Under his protection, Maple World began to truly thrive. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities. The various races of the world, humans, elves, spirits, and others, began to build something resembling civilization. But the White Mage was not content merely to protect. He was a scholar as well as a guardian, and his thirst for knowledge was as boundless as his power. He studied the fundamental forces that governed Maple World, seeking to understand the very fabric of reality itself. He established a great repository of learning, where he gathered texts and artifacts from across the world. He experimented with magic in all its forms, always searching, always questioning, always pushing the boundaries of what was known. Among his students and followers, there arose a group of dedicated individuals who called themselves the disciples of the White Mage. These were the finest minds and the noblest souls of the age, those who shared the White Mage's vision of a world elevated through knowledge and protected by power. They assisted him in his research, they carried out his will across the land, and they revered him not as a mere teacher, but as something approaching a god. For a time, this was enough. For a time, the White Mage found satisfaction in his role. But deep within his heart, a question began to grow. Small at first, but increasingly insistent with each passing year. He looked at the world he protected and saw that despite all his efforts, suffering continued. Despite his power, darkness persisted. Monsters were defeated only to be replaced by new threats. People he saved from one calamity fell victim to another. The cycle never ended. The White Mage began to wonder, was protection enough? Was it sufficient to simply guard against threats as they arose, or should he be seeking something more? Should he be searching for a way to eliminate darkness entirely? To create a world where protection was no longer necessary because nothing threatening remained? This question became an obsession. Chapter 2. The Descent into Depths. The White Mage's research took on a new focus. If he was to eliminate darkness from the world, he first needed to understand it completely. He began to study not just the light that was his specialty, but also its opposite. He delved into texts that spoke of shadow magic, of curses and hexes, of the darker aspects of existence that he had previously avoided. His disciples grew concerned. They cautioned him that such studies were dangerous, that even approaching such knowledge could corrupt the soul. The White Mage dismissed their worries with a gentle smile. How could the mere study of darkness harm one who embodied light itself? He was the White Mage, guardian of Maple World. His purpose was pure, his intentions noble. No amount of scholarly research could change that fundamental truth. Or so he believed. The White Mage's studies led him deeper and deeper into mysteries that had been left unexplored for good reason. He sought out forbidden knowledge, ancient texts written in languages that had died out because the civilizations that spoke them had destroyed themselves with the very powers the text described. He ventured into places where darkness pooled like stagnant water, observing, analyzing, and learning. And then, in a moment that would reshape the destiny of the entire world, the White Mage made a discovery. In the deepest reaches of his research, in texts so old they crumbled at his touch, he found references to two primal forces that existed before all else, the ultimate light and the ultimate darkness. These were not merely the light and shadow that he knew and manipulated with his magic. These were the fundamental principles upon which all of reality was constructed. They were the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the source from which everything flowed and to which everything would eventually return. The text spoke of these forces as separate and balanced, two halves of a cosmic whole. They suggested that neither could exist without the other, that they were locked in an eternal dance of opposition and unity. But the White Mage, reading these ancient words, came to a different conclusion. If these ultimate forces existed, and if they were the foundation of all reality, then surely the one who could master them both could reshape reality itself. Such a being would not merely protect the world. They would have the power to remake it entirely, to craft a new existence free from suffering, free from darkness, free from all the flaws that plague the current world. The White Mage became convinced that this was his true destiny. He had been given his tremendous power not simply to defend Maple World as it was, but to elevate it to what it could be. He would find these ultimate forces, he would master them both, and he would use that mastery to create a perfect world. His disciples pleaded with him to abandon this path. They could see the changes in their master, subtle at first, but growing more pronounced. His eyes, once warm and kind, had taken on a distant quality, as though he was looking at something far beyond the present moment. His smile, once genuine, had become fixed and unnerving. His actions, once guided by compassion, were now driven by an abstract ideology that seemed to value his vision of perfection over the messy reality of the people he was meant to protect. But the White Mage would not be swayed. He had seen the truth, or what he believed to be the truth, and he would pursue it to the end. He began a great ritual, one that would take years to prepare. He gathered materials from across Maple World and beyond. He inscribed circles of power that covered entire valleys. He spoke incantations that had never been meant for mortal or even immortal tongues to utter. And finally, when all was prepared, he began the ritual that would allow him to transcend his current existence and reach for the ultimate light and the ultimate darkness. What happened next has been the subject of speculation and debate for centuries. Some say that the White Mage succeeded in touching both primal forces, but was overwhelmed by the experience. Others claim that he found only one of the forces, the ultimate darkness, and was corrupted by it. Still others whisper that he found exactly what he was looking for, and that what came after was entirely intentional, part of a plan so complex and far-reaching that even now its true scope remains unclear. Whatever the truth, the result was undeniable. The ritual reached its climax in an explosion of power that shook the entire world. The sky itself seemed to crack, and for a moment witnesses reported seeing both the brightest light and the deepest darkness they had ever experienced merged together in a union that should have been impossible. When the light faded and the darkness receded, the White Mage was gone. In his place stood a different being, one that radiated power so immense and terrible that reality itself seemed to bend in his presence. His robes, once white as fresh snow, had become black as the void between stars. His eyes, once filled with compassion, now burned within cold fire that promised destruction to all who opposed him. The White Mage had become the Black Mage. Chapter 3. The World Aflame. At first, the transformation was not understood. The Black Mage's disciples, those who had remained loyal despite their concerns, approached him with questions and confusion. Surely this was merely a side effect of the ritual? Surely their master would return to his old self once he had recovered from the ordeal. The Black Mage looked upon his former followers, and in his gaze they saw a truth that chilled them to their very souls. The being before them was still the White Mage, but he had changed in ways that went far beyond the color of his robes. He had touched powers that transformed him fundamentally. His goals remained the same, to reshape the world into something better. But his understanding of what better meant had been radically altered. The world, the Black Mage declared, was flawed beyond redemption. The suffering, the chaos, the endless cycle of destruction and rebirth, these were not problems to be managed, but diseases to be cured. And there was only one cure, complete annihilation followed by reconstruction. He would tear down the current world entirely, reducing it to nothing, and from that nothing he would build a new world, a perfect world, one designed according to principles that only he, having touched the ultimate forces, could comprehend. His disciples were horrified. This was not what they had followed the White Mage to achieve. They had wanted to help people, to protect the innocent, to make the world better for those who lived in it. But the Black Mage's vision had no place for the people who currently existed. They were part of the flawed world, and so they too would have to be swept away. Some of the disciples tried to reason with him. They appealed to the compassion he had once shown, reminded him of the people he had saved, the lives he had touched. But the Black Mage dismissed their arguments with a wave of his hand. Compassion for individuals, he said, was a small thing compared to the great work he would accomplish. The temporary suffering of those now living was insignificant against the eternal perfection of the world he would create. When reason failed, some of the disciples attempted to stop him by force. It was a futile effort. The Black Mage's power had grown beyond measure. With magic that drew on both light and darkness, he destroyed those who opposed him, not with anger or hatred, but with the cold efficiency of someone removing an obstacle from their path. The remaining disciples scattered, fleeing to all corners of Maple World to bring warning of what their former master had become. But by the time they reached the major settlements, the Black Mage had already begun his terrible work. He started in the regions that had been most desolate, places where few people lived. With power that defied comprehension, he simply unmade these areas, reducing them to void. Mountains disappeared. Forests vanished. Lakes evaporated into nothing. It was as if reality itself was being erased wherever the Black Mage directed his attention. But annihilation was not his only goal. As he destroyed, he also created, though what he created was twisted and wrong. From the darkness, he brought forth creatures of nightmare, beings that existed only to spread destruction. He corrupted the natural monsters of the world, transforming them into servants of his will. And, most terribly, he began to gather followers. Not all those who learned of the Black Mage's plans were horrified by them. Some, those who had experienced the worst that Maple World had to offer, found his promises appealing. A perfect world, even if it meant the destruction of the current one. An end to all suffering, even if it required passing through an apocalypse first. To those who had lost everything, who had nothing left to live for, the Black Mage's vision offered a strange kind of hope. Others followed him not out of belief, but out of fear or desire for power. The Black Mage was the strongest being in existence, and those who served him faithfully would be rewarded with power beyond their wildest dreams. They would become his commanders, his generals in the war he was waging against the world itself. From among these followers, the Black Mage selected a few to be his direct subordinates. He augmented them with his magic, transforming them into beings of tremendous power, second only to himself. These became known as his commanders, and each would play a crucial role in the war to come. As the Black Mage's power grew and spread, the people of Maple World finally understood the magnitude of the threat they faced. This was not a monster to be driven back, or a crisis to be endured. This was an existential threat, something that could genuinely end their world. If the Black Mage was not stopped, everything would be destroyed. But how could they stop him? He had been the strongest being in Maple World even as the White Mage. Now, transformed and wielding powers that bridged light and darkness, he was virtually unstoppable. Armies that marched against him were obliterated. Mages who challenged him were struck down. Heroes who confronted him were destroyed. The world stood on the brink of annihilation, and there seemed to be no hope of salvation. And then, the heroes began to emerge. Chapter 4. The first hero, Mercedes, Queen of the Elves. In the ancient forest of EunWol, hidden from the world by powerful magic and natural barriers, dwelt the Elves, one of the oldest and most magical races in Maple World. The Elves had watched the rise of the Black Mage with growing alarm, for their long lives and deep connection to the world allowed them to sense the wrongness of his magic in ways that shorter-lived races could not. The Elves were led by their queen, Mercedes, who had ruled for centuries with wisdom and grace. Mercedes was young for an elf queen, merely a few hundred years old, but she had proven herself to be a leader of exceptional ability. She was not only skilled in the bow and the dual crossbows favored by her people, but also a master of the ancient elf magic that could summon spirits and bend nature itself to her will. When news reached EunWol of entire regions being unmade by the Black Mage's power, Mercedes knew that isolation was no longer an option. The elves had long kept themselves separate from the affairs of other races, believing that their forest sanctuary was all they needed to protect. But if the Black Mage succeeded in his goal of destroying the world, no sanctuary would remain safe. Mercedes made a decision that would shock her advisors and her people. She would leave EunWol. She would go out into the wider world and fight against the Black Mage. More than that, she would rally the other races to the cause, forging alliances and building an army capable of standing against the darkness. It was a tremendous risk. The elves had not fought in a major war in living memory. Many of Mercedes' subjects questioned whether they should involve themselves in the conflicts of the outside world. But Mercedes understood what many did not. This was not someone else's conflict. This was a threat to all existence, and if the elves did not stand against it, they would fall with everyone else. Mercedes departed EunWol with a retinue of her finest warriors, but she quickly realized that the threat was even worse than she had imagined. The world beyond her forest was in chaos. The Black Mage's forces were everywhere, spreading destruction and terror. Refugees clogged the roads, fleeing from horrors that pursued them relentlessly. But even in this darkness, Mercedes found hope. She found people fighting back, resisting despite impossible odds. She found soldiers holding the line even as their comrades fell around them. She found mages exhausting themselves to protect civilians. She found ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of courage. Mercedes began to organize these scattered resistances into something more coherent. Using her centuries of tactical knowledge and her natural charisma, she united disparate groups under a common banner. She led them in battles against the Black Mage's forces, and through a combination of elven magic and inspired strategy, she won victories that had seemed impossible. Word of the Elf Queen who fought against the Black Mage began to spread. Hope, which had been in desperately short supply, began to kindle in the hearts of those who heard the tales. If someone as powerful and wise as Mercedes believed the Black Mage could be stopped, then perhaps there was a chance after all. But Mercedes knew that victory in individual battles was not enough. The Black Mage himself remained untouchable, and unless he could be confronted directly, All their efforts would merely delay the inevitable. She needed more than an army. She needed champions who could stand against the Black Mage's power itself. She needed other heroes. Chapter 5. The Warrior of Ice, Aran. In the frozen Northlands, where snow fell year-round and glaciers carved through mountains, there lived a clan of warriors renowned for their skill in battle. These people had adapted to their harsh environment, becoming as tough and unyielding as the ice that surrounded them. They trained from childhood in the arts of war, believing that strength and martial prowess were the highest virtues. Among these warriors, one stood above all others. Aran, a young woman whose skill with the polearm was legendary even among her own people. Aran had been born with an instinctive understanding of combat that others spent lifetimes trying to achieve. She could read the flow of a battle like others read books. Her movements in combat were like a deadly dance, each strike flowing naturally into the next. But Aran was not merely skilled, she possessed a determination that bordered on the supernatural. Once she set her mind to something, nothing could deter her. This iron will, combined with her combat prowess, made her a force of nature on the battlefield. When the Black Mage's forces reached the frozen north, Aran's clan stood against them. They fought with all their considerable skill, but the enemy was unlike anything they had faced before. The Black Mage's commanders had sent creatures twisted by dark magic, beings that did not fall to wounds that should have been fatal, and that fought with a savagery that overwhelmed even the most skilled warriors. Aran watched her people fall one by one, and rage ignited in her heart. These monsters had invaded her homeland, had killed her kinsmen, had threatened everything she held dear. She would not allow it. She could not allow it. Aran fought with a fury that shocked even her enemies. She wielded her polearm with such speed and precision that it seemed to be in multiple places at once. She discovered that by channeling her will and her rage, she could manifest the very ice and snow around her as weapons, creating storms and blizzards that froze her enemies where they stood. But even her tremendous power was not enough to stop the tide of darkness. Her clan was being destroyed, her homeland was being overrun, and Aran, for all her strength, was only one person. It was then that Mercedes arrived, having heard tales of a warrior in the north who fought like a demon against the Black Mage's forces. The Elf Queen saw in Aran exactly what she had been searching for, someone with the power and the will to stand against the darkness. Mercedes offered Aran a place among those who would fight not just to defend one region, but to save the entire world. Aran, surveying the ruins of her homeland and the graves of her fallen comrades, accepted without hesitation. She would take her vengeance not just on the creatures that had destroyed her home, but on the one who had sent them, the Black Mage himself. Together, Mercedes and Aran began to turn the tide in the north. The Elf Queen's strategic brilliance combined with the warrior's raw power proved to be a devastating combination. They drove back the Black Mage's forces, reclaimed territories that had been lost, and gave the people of the north hope that they might survive. But both of them knew that defense was not enough. They needed to take the fight to the Black Mage directly, and for that, they needed more allies. They needed more heroes. Chapter 6. The Gentleman Thief, Phantom. In the great cities of Maple World, far from the frozen north and the ancient forests, a different kind of legend was being born. Stories circulated of a master thief who could steal anything from anyone, a mysterious figure who left behind only a calling card bearing the image of a phantom. This thief was said to be so skilled that he could walk through the most heavily guarded treasuries as if they were unprotected. He could escape from any prison, evade any pursuer, and vanish into thin air when cornered. The thief called himself Phantom, and he lived a life of excitement and luxury funded by his extraordinary acquisitions. But Phantom was not a common criminal. He styled himself as a gentleman thief, someone who stole from the corrupt and the powerful, never from those who could not afford the loss. He was as famous for his charm and his style as he was for his skill at theft. Phantom's life changed the day he tried to steal a particular treasure from a heavily guarded repository. The treasure was a simple thing, a crystal that was said to bring good fortune. But Phantom had his reasons for wanting it, reasons that had nothing to do with its monetary value. He successfully infiltrated the repository, bypassing guards and traps with his usual ease. But when he reached the crystal, he found someone else already there, Mercedes, the Elf Queen. She too had come for the crystal, for she had learned that it held power that could be useful in the fight against the Black Mage. The two faced off, neither willing to back down. Phantom was captivated immediately. He had never met anyone quite like Mercedes before. Powerful, beautiful, determined, with an aura of ancient wisdom that only the elves possessed. Mercedes, for her part, was intrigued by this charming rogue who showed no fear even when facing the Queen of the Elves. Their standoff ended when the Black Mage's forces attacked the repository, seeking the same crystal for their own dark purposes. Phantom and Mercedes were forced to cooperate to fend off the attackers. Fighting back to back, they discovered that their skills complemented each other perfectly. Mercedes's magic and archery, combined with Phantom's agility and his ability to steal and use the techniques of others, created a synergy that devastated their enemies. When the battle was over, Mercedes explained her mission to Phantom. She told him of the Black Mage, of the threat to the world, of the need for heroes to stand against the darkness. Phantom listened with his characteristic half-smile, seemingly unmoved. But then Mercedes mentioned something that changed everything. Among those who had already fallen to the Black Mage's forces were the rulers of several great cities, including one city-state that Phantom had particular reason to care about. Though he had never spoken of it, Phantom had connections to that place, people he cared for who had been killed in the Black Mage's rampage. Phantom's smile faded. He looked at the crystal they had both come for, then handed it to Mercedes without a word. When she asked why, he simply said that if she was fighting to protect the world, she would need it more than he did. Mercedes invited him to join her cause. Phantom accepted, but he did so with his own style. He declared that he would become the Phantom Thief of Justice, and that he would steal from the Black Mage himself. Steal his plans, his secrets, and ultimately his victory. With Phantom's addition to their group, the heroes gained not just a formidable combatant, but also a master of infiltration and intelligence gathering. Phantom's network of contacts and his ability to slip unnoticed into any location provided them with information that proved invaluable in the war to come. And still, they needed more allies. The Black Mage was too powerful to be defeated by even 3 heroes of their caliber. Chapter 7. The Dragon Master Freud. In an age where magic took many forms, one of the most powerful and rarest was the magic of dragons. These ancient and mighty creatures were beings of immense power, capable of reshaping the land with their breath and their will. But dragons were also proud and solitary, rarely involving themselves in the affairs of the mortal races. There existed, however, a secret tradition of dragon masters, individuals who had earned the respect and partnership of dragons through deeds of great courage and purity of spirit. These dragon masters could call upon the power of their dragon companions, creating a bond that made both stronger. Freud was the greatest dragon master of his age. A powerful mage in his own right, Freud had formed a bond with Aran, a mighty dragon whose scales shimmered with all the colors of magic itself. Together they had traveled the world, seeking knowledge and helping those in need. When the Black Mage began his campaign of destruction, Freud and Aran were among the first to recognize the true scale of the threat. Freud had studied ancient lore, and he understood that the Black Mage wielded powers that could potentially unmake the world. He knew that this was a threat that demanded action from everyone capable of standing against it. Freud sought out other dragon masters, hoping to gather them and their dragon companions into an alliance that could challenge the Black Mage. But he found that many dragons were reluctant to involve themselves. They were ancient beings, and they had seen many threats rise and fall over the millennia. Some believe they could simply retreat to their lairs and wait for this crisis to pass, as they had done with others. Aran, however, had no such illusions. The dragon had sensed something in the Black Mage's power that terrified him in a way that few things could. This was not a threat that would simply pass. This was something that could genuinely end the world, dragons and all. Freud and Aran set out to join the fight, and their path eventually led them to Mercedes and her growing band of heroes. The Elf Queen welcomed the Dragon Master gladly, for she understood the tremendous asset he represented. With Freud's magical knowledge, his bond with Aran, and his understanding of ancient lore, the heroes gained a powerful ally. But Freud brought more than just his own power. He brought hope for the future. Freud believed that the bond between Dragon Masters and dragons was something that could be preserved and passed down, even if the original Dragon Masters fell. He began to develop techniques that would allow a Dragon Master to pass their bond and their knowledge to a successor, ensuring that the tradition would not die even if he did. This would prove to be a crucial decision, one with consequences that would echo through the centuries. Chapter 8. The Light and Darkness. Luminous among the Black Mage's disciples, those who had studied under him when he was still the White Mage, there was one who could not accept what his master had become. This disciple was a young mage of exceptional talent, one who had been among the White Mage's favorites, one who had learned to wield both light and dark magic under his master's tutelage. This mage, who would come to be known as Luminous, had believed in the White Mage's original vision of protecting and elevating the world. He had followed his master's teachings faithfully, learning to balance the opposing forces of light and darkness in his magic. But when the White Mage transformed into the Black Mage and declared his intention to destroy the world, Luminous was faced with an impossible choice. At first, Luminous tried to convince himself that his master's transformation was temporary, that the White Mage he had known would return. But as he witnessed the Black Mage's atrocities, as he saw the destruction and the suffering, he could no longer deny the truth. His master was gone, replaced by something that had to be stopped. Luminous made the agonizing decision to oppose the Black Mage. It was a decision that cost him dearly. The other disciples who had remained loyal to the Black Mage viewed him as a traitor. The Black Mage himself regarded Luminous with something approaching disappointment, as a failed student who had not understood the grand vision. But Luminous stood firm. He took the teachings he had learned from the White Mage, the ability to balance and wield both light and darkness, and turn them against the Black Mage. He became a living embodiment of equilibrium, able to shift between light and shadow, using each to enhance his power while preventing either from consuming him. Luminous's defection was a significant blow to the Black Mage. As one of his most talented former disciples, Luminous understood the Black Mage's magic better than almost anyone else alive. He knew the techniques, the strategies, the weaknesses. This knowledge made him invaluable to Mercedes and the heroes. When Luminous joined the heroes, he brought with him not just his considerable power, but also crucial intelligence about the Black Mage's abilities and plans. He explained how the Black Mage's magic worked, what powers he possessed, and what might be necessary to defeat him. But Luminous also brought a burden of guilt. He felt responsible for what the White Mage had become, believing that perhaps he and the other disciples should have done more to prevent the transformation. Mercedes and the others tried to convince him that the White Mage's choices were his own, but Luminous could not entirely shake the feeling that he had failed his master. This guilt drove Luminous to fight harder than anyone else. He was determined to stop the Black Mage, not out of hatred, but out of a desperate hope that perhaps, somehow, he could save what remained of the man who had once been the world's greatest protector. Chapter 9. The Forgotten Hero, EunWol. There was one more hero, though his story is the saddest of all. His name was EunWol, though he would later be remembered, or rather not remembered, as Shade. EunWol was a warrior of exceptional skill, a master of the close combat techniques practiced by the fox spirits of the ancient valleys. He was known for his unwavering loyalty, his compassionate heart, and his willingness to sacrifice anything for those he cared about. EunWol joined the heroes not for glory or revenge, but simply because it was the right thing to do. He saw people suffering under the Black Mage's reign of terror, and his conscience would not allow him to stand aside. He sought out Mercedes and offered his services, asking for nothing in return except the chance to protect the innocent. The heroes welcomed EunWol gladly. His fighting skills were formidable, his spirit unbreakable, and his dedication absolute. Among the 6 heroes, EunWol was often the heart of the group, the one who kept spirits up during dark times, the one who reminded them why they were fighting when the odds seemed insurmountable. But EunWol possessed something else as well, a connection to the ancient fox spirits, beings that existed partially outside of normal reality. Through this connection, EunWol had access to powers that could transcend the normal limitations of time and space. This would prove to be both a blessing and a terrible curse. With the 6 heroes united, Mercedes, Aran, Phantom, Freud, Luminous, and EunWol, the tide of the war began to shift. Each hero was powerful individually, but together they were a force that could challenge even the Black Mage himself. Chapter 10. The War of Light and Shadow. The war that followed would be remembered for centuries as the greatest conflict in MapleWorld's history. The 6 heroes led the forces of light against the Black Mage's army of darkness in battles that shook the very foundations of the world. Mercedes commanded the allied armies with brilliant strategy, coordinating forces from dozens of different races and factions into a unified whole. Her elven warriors fought alongside human soldiers, dwarven siege engineers, and mages from every tradition. She turned the scattered resistance into a true military force capable of standing against the Black Mage's seemingly endless hordes. Aran served as the vanguard, leading charges that shattered enemy formations. Her polearm became a symbol of hope on the battlefield. Wherever the fighting was fiercest, wherever the line threatened to break, Aran would appear, her weapon whirling in deadly arcs, her power over ice freezing entire battalions of enemies in place. Phantom operated in the shadows, infiltrating enemy strongholds and sabotaging the Black Mage's plans before they could come to fruition. He stole crucial documents that revealed enemy movements. He freed prisoners who provided valuable intelligence, and he even managed to defeat some of the Black Mage's lesser commanders through cunning rather than direct confrontation. Freud and Aran dominated the skies, the dragon's breath weapon devastating enemy positions, while Freud's magic provided support to allied forces across vast distances. The sight of Aran soaring overhead became a rallying point for the allied armies, a visible reminder that the gods of old had not abandoned them. Luminous battled the Black Mage's dark mages, countering their corrupt magic with his own balanced power. He could match them in darkness and surpass them in light, and his understanding of the principles that underlay the Black Mage's magic allowed him to unravel spells that would have devastated the allied forces. And EunWol fought everywhere, appearing wherever he was needed most, his connection to the fox spirits, allowing him to move in ways that seemed to defy natural law. He saved countless lives with his interventions, always arriving at just the right moment to turn the tide of a battle or protect those who could not protect themselves. The Black Mage's commanders fell one by one. The commanders were beings of tremendous power, each nearly a match for one of the heroes, but they could not stand against the 6 fighting in concert. When the commanders gathered to face the heroes in battle, they were defeated through a combination of strategy, power, and sacrifice. But victories against the commanders came at a terrible cost. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers died in the battles. Entire cities were destroyed in the fighting. Regions of MapleWorld were left scarred and poisoned by the dark magic unleashed during the conflict. And through it all, the Black Mage himself remained untouchable, watching from his dark fortress, seemingly unconcerned by the defeats of his forces. It became increasingly clear to the heroes that no matter how many battles they won, no matter how many of his commanders they defeated, the war would not be over until they confronted the Black Mage directly. The time came for the final battle. Chapter 11. The Final Confrontation. The heroes led their armies to the Black Mage's fortress, a structure of twisted reality that seemed to exist partially in the normal world and partially in some other, darker dimension. Dark energy crackled around it, and the very ground surrounding it was dead and lifeless, drained of all vitality. The allied forces engaged the last of the Black Mage's armies while the 6 heroes entered the fortress to confront its master. They fought their way through corridors that defied geometry, through rooms where the laws of physics seemed optional, past guardians and traps that killed or incapacitated many of the soldiers who had accompanied them. Finally, they reached the throne room where the Black Mage waited. He sat upon a throne of crystallized darkness, his appearance almost unchanged from when he had been the White Mage, save for the black robes and the terrible power that radiated from him. When he saw the heroes, particularly when he saw Luminous, something that might have been sadness flickered across his face. The Black Mage spoke to them, and his voice was the same one that had once taught and inspired, now cold and distant. He told them that he bore them no ill will, that he understood they were acting according to their limited understanding of the situation, but they could not comprehend the necessity of what he was doing. They could not see the grand design, the perfect world that would emerge from the ashes of the current one. He offered them one final chance to stand aside, to let him complete his work. In the new world he would create, he promised, there would be no suffering, no pain, no death. It would be a paradise beyond imagining. The heroes rejected his offer. Mercedes spoke for all of them when she said that a world purchased with the destruction of the current one, with the deaths of everyone who now lived, was not paradise but an abomination. Whatever the Black Mage had become, whatever he believed he was doing, he had to be stopped. The Black Mage rose from his throne, and the final battle began. It was a fight that transcended normal combat. The Black Mage wielded powers that could unmake reality itself. With a gesture, he could create voids in space that swallowed matter and energy. With a word, he could summon legions of shadow creatures. With a thought, he could strike at the very life force of his opponents. The 6 heroes fought with everything they had. Mercedes called upon the ancient spirits of EunWol, summoning avatars of nature to battle the Black Mage's darkness. Aran pushed her control over ice to its absolute limit, creating blizzards and glaciers within the throne room itself. Phantom moved like lightning, striking at the Black Mage from impossible angles while somehow stealing fragments of the Black Mage's own power to use against him. Freud and Aran merged their power, the Dragon Master channeling the full might of the dragon through his own body, unleashing magical attacks of devastating power. Luminous matched the Black Mage darkness for darkness and light for light, their magic colliding in explosions that shook the fortress to its foundations. And EunWol fought with the desperation of someone who knew that this was the moment that would determine everything, using his connection to the fox spirits to transcend his normal limitations, moving between moments, striking from impossible angles. But even the combined might of the 6 heroes was not enough to defeat the Black Mage. He was too powerful, his mastery of the ultimate forces too complete. Every attack they launched he countered, every strategy they attempted he thwarted. Slowly but inexorably he was overpowering them. The heroes realized a terrible truth. The Black Mage could not be defeated by force alone. No amount of power, no matter how great, would be sufficient to destroy him. He had transcended the normal limitations of existence. He was functionally invincible. But if he could not be destroyed, perhaps he could be contained. Luminous, drawing on his knowledge of the Black Mage's magic, proposed a desperate plan. Using all their power combined, they could create a seal that would trap the Black Mage, imprisoning him in a state between existence and non-existence, where he could not act upon the world. It would not kill him, but it would neutralize him, preventing him from carrying out his plan to destroy the world. The cost of creating such a seal would be immense. It would require the heroes to sacrifice their own life forces, to essentially give up their existences to power the seal. And even then, there was no guarantee it would hold forever. The heroes did not hesitate. They had known from the beginning that this fight might require the ultimate sacrifice. They had accepted that possibility when they chose to stand against the darkness. They began the ritual to create the seal. Chapter 12. The Sealing. The ritual to seal the Black Mage was unlike any magic that had been performed before. It drew upon the deepest reserves of each hero's power, channeling their life force, their very essence, into creating a prison that could hold a being who had touched the ultimate forces of existence. The Black Mage realized what they were attempting and fought back with renewed fury. He understood that while he could defeat them in direct combat, he was vulnerable to this particular technique. The seal they were creating was based on principles he himself had taught when he was the White Mage, principles of binding and containment that could work even against immense power. The throne room became a maelstrom of conflicting energies. The Black Mage struck at the heroes with everything he had, trying to disrupt the ritual before it could be completed. Luminous bore the brunt of these attacks, using his own body as a shield to protect the others as they poured their power into the seal. Mercedes channeled the life force of the elven forest itself, drawing on a connection to EunWol that went back thousands of years. The effort aged her visibly, her eternally youthful elven features showing lines of strain and exhaustion that should have been impossible. Aran transformed her rage and her warrior spirit into pure energy, feeding it into the seal. Ice spread from her body, encasing her even as she continued to channel her power. Phantom gave up something he had guarded carefully throughout his entire life. The true emotions he had hidden behind his charming facade, the genuine love he had developed for Mercedes, the real person behind the gentleman thief persona. These truths, these pieces of his authentic self, became part of the seal. Freud and Aran combined their essences completely, dragon and human becoming one in a way that had never been done before. The Dragon Master's knowledge, the dragon's power, all of it flowed into the seal, creating chains of pure magic that wrapped around the Black Mage. And EunWol gave everything. His connection to the fox spirits allowed him to offer something the others could not. He offered his very existence, his place in the world's memory, his presence in the timeline itself. It was a sacrifice so profound that reality itself would have to adjust to accommodate it. The seal took shape around the Black Mage, a sphere of crystallized light and darkness combined, every color and no color simultaneously. The Black Mage fought against it, his power pushing back against the binding. But the combined might of the 6 heroes was just barely enough. With a final surge of effort that left them all on the verge of death, the heroes completed the seal. The Black Mage was trapped, frozen in a moment of time, unable to move or act or use his terrible power. The immediate threat was ended, but the cost was even greater than they had anticipated. The seal required constant power to maintain itself. It would drain energy from the world around it, from the magic that flowed through MapleWorld, and most of all, from the heroes themselves. To ensure the seal held, they would have to remain connected to it, sustaining it with their own life forces. They could not die, for their deaths would weaken the seal. But neither could they truly live, for maintaining the seal required them to enter a state of suspended animation, neither alive nor dead, existing in the space between. The heroes made their preparations. They said their goodbyes to the soldiers who had fought alongside them, to the people they had protected, to the world they had saved. They made arrangements for what would come after, for the governance of the Allied forces, for the rebuilding that would be necessary. Mercedes returned briefly to EunWol, naming a successor who would rule in her absence. She charged her people with the duty of remembering, of preserving the knowledge of what had happened, so that future generations would understand the sacrifice that had been made. Aran journeyed north one last time, to the frozen homeland where she had first taken up arms against the darkness. She erected a monument to her fallen clan, promising them that their deaths had not been in vain. Phantom used his network of contacts to ensure that the treasures he had stolen over the years would be distributed to those who needed them. He left a final message for Mercedes, words of love he had never quite managed to say in person, sealed in a letter he hoped she would never have to read. Freud made arrangements for the preservation of the Dragon Master legacy. He created a system by which his knowledge and his bond with Aran could be passed to a successor, ensuring that even if he was sealed away, the tradition would continue. A young boy in a distant village would one day inherit this legacy and become the new Dragon Master, though he would be known by a different name, Evan. Luminous sought out the remaining disciples of the White Mage, those who had not followed the Black Mage into darkness. He shared with them everything he had learned, asking them to continue studying the balance between light and dark, hoping that future mages might learn from what had happened and find a better path. And EunWol said goodbye to the fox spirits who had been his companions and his connection to power. He knew that his sacrifice would be different from the others. When he gave himself to the seal, he would not merely be put into stasis. He would be erased from memory itself, forgotten by the world, his deeds and his very existence fading from the timeline. The fox spirits wept for him, for they existed partially outside of time and would therefore remember him even when no one else could. They promised to watch over the world in his absence, to preserve at least some memory of the hero who had given up everything, even his own legacy. The 6 heroes gathered at the site of the seal where the Black Mage hung suspended in crystallized magic. One by one, they placed their hands upon the seal and allowed it to draw them in. Mercedes was the first. As the seal took her, her last thought was of EunWol, of the forest she had ruled and loved, and of the hope that it would still be standing when she woke again. Aran followed, her warrior spirit raging against the imprisonment even as she accepted its necessity. She promised herself that when she woke, she would continue the fight no matter how many centuries had passed. Phantom went next, his characteristic smile fixed on his face even as his consciousness faded. He had stolen many things in his life, but the Black Mage had stolen something from him in return, the future he might have had. Freud and Aran entered the seal together, their merged consciousness holding onto one final thought, the hope that the Dragon Master tradition would survive, that their sacrifice would not be the end of the bond between humans and dragons. Luminous stepped forward, looking one last time at the Black Mage, at the being who had once been his beloved teacher. He entered the seal with a prayer that somehow, someday, the White Mage might be separated from the Black Mage, that the good man who had once existed might be saved from the monster he had become. And finally, EunWol placed his hand on the seal. As it drew him in, reality began to shift. The memories of those watching began to change. Where there had been 6 heroes, there were now 5. EunWol's deeds were attributed to others or forgotten entirely. His name faded from documents and records. Even those who had fought alongside him found their memories changing, the space where EunWol had been filling in with vague recollections of other events. The fox spirits watched in sorrow as the 6th hero was erased from the world's memory, becoming the forgotten hero, the one whose sacrifice was perhaps the greatest because it would never be remembered or honored. The seal settled into place, anchored to the spot where the final battle had occurred. The Allied forces established a guard around it, determined to ensure that no one would disturb it, that nothing would weaken it. The immediate threat was over. The Black Mage was sealed. The world was saved. But the scars of the war ran deep. Chapter 13. The Age of Silence. The centuries that followed the sealing of the Black Mage were known as the Age of Silence, for it was a time when magic itself seemed to diminish in the world. The constant drain of the seal, pulling power from MapleStory to maintain itself, had weakened the fundamental magical forces that permeated reality. Mages found their spells less effective. Magical creatures became scarce. The great wonders that had been accomplished through magic in the age before the Black Mage became difficult or impossible to replicate. But life continued. The races of MapleStory rebuilt what had been destroyed. They established new kingdoms and new alliances. They developed technologies and techniques that relied less on magic and more on craftsmanship and ingenuity. The memory of the Black Mage and the heroes who had sealed him became legend, then myth. Each generation that passed knew the story a little less clearly than the one before. Details were lost or changed. The names of the heroes were preserved in songs and stories, but few people truly understood what they had done or what they had sacrificed. In EunWol, the elves remembered better than most. Their long lives meant that the chain of memory was less attenuated. They maintained vigil over Mercedes' resting place, keeping alive the knowledge of what their queen had done. But even among the elves, as centuries passed, the story began to take on an air of unreality, of ancient history so distant it might as well be myth. The The seal itself remained, guarded by an organization that called themselves the Guardians. These warriors and mages dedicated their lives to watching over the seal, ensuring that nothing disturbed it. They passed down their duty from generation to generation, a sacred trust that they maintained even as the world around them changed and evolved. But the seal was not as permanent as those who created it had hoped. The Black Mage, trapped within the seal, was not truly unconscious. His mind remained active, working constantly to find a way to escape. He could not use his power directly. The seal prevented that. But he could think, he could plan, and he could exert subtle influences on the world beyond his prison. Through these subtle influences, the Black Mage began to gather followers even from within his seal. He sent dreams to those with dark hearts or desperate circumstances, promising them power if they would serve him. He whispered to mages who studied forbidden texts, guiding them toward knowledge that would serve his purposes. Most importantly, he began to work on weakening the seal from within. It was slow work, requiring centuries of effort, but the Black Mage had nothing but time. Bit by bit, atom by atom, he eroded the structure of his prison. He could not break it quickly. That would alert the guardians and the heroes whose life force sustained it. But he could weaken it gradually, so slowly that the change would be imperceptible. And he began to prepare his commanders for his eventual return. Chapter 14. The Commanders. Awaken. The Black Mage's commanders had not been sealed with their master. They had been defeated, scattered, some even believed destroyed, but they were beings of tremendous power, and they had not truly died. Instead, they had retreated to hidden places to recover, to regain their strength, to wait for the day when their master would return. As the seal slowly weakened over the centuries, the commanders began to stir. The first to fully awaken was Hilla, the necromancer. In life, she had been a minor mage of no particular importance, someone overlooked and dismissed by those who should have recognized her talent. The Black Mage had found her, had seen her potential, and had offered her power beyond her wildest dreams. In exchange for her loyalty, he had transformed her, giving her dominion over death itself. Hilla had the power to raise the dead, to command armies of undead servants, to drain the life from the living and sustain herself indefinitely. She had been one of the Black Mage's most effective commanders during the war, and now, awakening in a new age, she set about preparing for his return. She established herself in the region that would come to be known as Lefre, building a necromantic tower from which she could conduct her dark work. She began raising armies of the dead, gathering resources, and subtly influencing events across Mapleworld to create conditions favorable for the Black Mage's return. Next came Damien, the demon. Damien's story was one of the most tragic among the commanders. He had not originally been a follower of the Black Mage. In fact, he had been a hero who fought against him, driven by a desire to protect his mother and his younger brother. But Damien had been betrayed by those he trusted, manipulated by forces working for the Black Mage. In his rage and despair, he had been corrupted, transformed into a demon of terrible power. The Black Mage had taken this broken hero and remade him as one of his most fearsome commanders. When Damien awoke, he was still driven by the same rage that had consumed him during his transformation. But beneath that rage was a core of pain, of guilt for what he had become and what he had done. His younger brother, whom he had fought to protect, was long dead, centuries gone. Everything Damien had cared about was dust. He served the Black Mage not out of loyalty, but out of a nihilistic belief that nothing mattered anymore, that the world deserved to be destroyed for the cruelties it inflicted on those who tried to do good. Lotus and Orchid, the twins who had been transformed into cyborg commanders, awakened together. They had been the prince and princess of an advanced civilization, heirs to a kingdom of prosperity and learning. But the Black Mage had destroyed their kingdom, killed their parents, and taken the twins captive. He had subjected them to horrific experiments, replacing parts of their bodies with mechanical components, twisting their minds, and turning them into weapons. By the time the transformation was complete, they remembered their past lives only as distant dreams, believing themselves to be the Black Mage's loyal servants, created specifically to serve him. When they awoke in the modern age, they began to gather advanced technology, combining it with the dark magic the Black Mage had instilled in them. They established an organization called the Nova, using it as a front for their preparations for the Black Mage's return. Magnus, the war mage who had once been a hero of his people, awoke with his power diminished, but his determination unshaken. Magnus had been a king, a leader who commanded respect and loyalty. But he had been seduced by the Black Mage's promises of power sufficient to protect his people from all threats. By the time Magnus realized the price of that power, it was too late. He had been transformed, corrupted, his noble intentions twisted into something dark. His people had been destroyed in part because of his own actions while under the Black Mage's influence. Magnus established himself as a warlord, gathering armies through a combination of his strategic brilliance and the fear his reputation inspired. He conquered territories, preparing strongholds that could serve the Black Mage when he finally returned. And then there was Guaru, the enormous beast of a commander whose strength was matched only by his loyalty to the Black Mage. Guaru had been enhanced with dark magic until he became a living engine of destruction, capable of leveling fortresses with his bare hands. When Guaru awoke, he immediately set about gathering monster armies, using his power to dominate and control creatures that would normally be too wild to organize. He established himself in remote regions, building up forces away from the eyes of civilization. The commanders worked sometimes together, sometimes separately, but always toward the same goal, weakening the world's defenses, gathering power and resources, and preparing for the day when the Black Mage would break free from his seal. Chapter 15: The Heroes Return. As the seal weakened, something unexpected began to happen. The heroes who had sustained it for centuries began to wake. They did not wake all at once or in the same way. The process was gradual and confusing, and each hero's return was marked by difficulty and struggle. Aran was the first to wake, but she did so with no memory of who she was or what she had done. The long centuries of maintaining the seal had damaged her mind, scattering her memories like leaves in a storm. She awoke on a ship in the frozen seas near her homeland, found by a young girl named Leland, who brought her to the village of Rien. Aran could not remember her name, her past, or why she felt such a strong connection to the polearm that had been found with her. But she could still fight. The muscle memory of countless battles remained even when the memories themselves were gone. As she began to recover and train, fragments of her past started to return, confusing glimpses of a war fought long ago. Mercedes awoke in EunWol, but she found her kingdom much changed. The elves had indeed maintained vigil over her all these centuries, but they had also suffered greatly. In her absence, EunWol had been invaded by demons, twisted creatures that had corrupted parts of the sacred forest. The elves had fought back, but they were a shadow of what they had been during Mercedes's reign. The Elf Queen returned to a kingdom that desperately needed her, but she found that the world had moved on in her absence. The alliances she had forged were ancient history. The tactics she knew were outdated. She had to learn how to lead all over again, in a world that was familiar yet strange. Phantom awoke to find that his legend had grown far beyond the reality. Stories of the gentleman thief had been told and retold until he was more fictional character than real person. His network of contacts was long dead. The treasures he had hidden had been found or lost. Even his ship, which had once been the finest vessel on any sea, had been relegated to a museum. But worst of all, Phantom awoke to discover that Mercedes had already returned and did not remember him. The damage to her memories had erased their relationship, the connection they had shared. To her, he was a stranger claiming to be someone she should know. It was a pain worse than any physical wound Phantom had ever suffered. Luminous's awakening was perhaps the most dramatic. The long centuries of maintaining the seal had affected his ability to balance light and darkness. When he woke, he found himself shifting uncontrollably between states of light and shadow, each threatening to consume him entirely. He had to relearn the techniques he had mastered centuries ago, struggling to regain the equilibrium that had once come naturally. He also found that his fellow disciples of the White Mage were long gone, their traditions scattered or lost. The knowledge of how to balance light and darkness had been largely forgotten, considered too dangerous to teach. Luminous was alone with his power and his memories of the teacher who had become the greatest threat to the world. Freud did not wake at all. The Dragon Master's sacrifice had been too complete, his essence too thoroughly merged with the seal. But his legacy did survive, passed down through the ages until it reached a young boy named Evan. Evan was an ordinary farm boy with no particular destiny until the day he found a dragon egg, an artifact that should not have existed in the modern age. When the egg hatched, the dragon that emerged was small and weak, a pale shadow of the mighty Aran. But it carried Freud's memories and his knowledge, and slowly it began to pass these on to Evan. Evan became the new Dragon Master, inheriting a legacy he did not fully understand, thrust into a conflict that began before he was born. He had to grow up quickly, learning to harness the power of the dragon bond while dealing with forces that wanted to use him, destroy him, or corrupt him for their own ends. And EunWol, the forgotten hero, did not wake because the world did not remember him well enough to allow him to return. His sacrifice had been too complete. Even as the seal weakened, even as the other heroes returned, EunWol remained trapped, forgotten, a ghost in the machine of reality itself. But he was not entirely gone. The fox spirits remembered, and they worked in subtle ways to create conditions that might allow EunWol to return. It would take the efforts of a successor, someone who could walk the same path and take on the legacy of the forgotten hero, to finally bring EunWol back from the void of non-existence. This successor would eventually be found, a young person who felt the call of the fox spirits and took on the name Shade, becoming the spiritual inheritor of EunWol's power and purpose. Chapter 16. The modern world awakens. As the heroes returned, the modern world of MapleWorld began to understand that something was terribly wrong. Strange occurrences were becoming more frequent. Monsters were growing more aggressive and more powerful. Reports came in of undead armies marching in remote regions, of entire villages disappearing overnight, of dark magic that hadn't been seen in centuries suddenly reappearing. The various kingdoms and factions of MapleWorld had grown complacent during the long peace. They had armies and defenses, but these were designed to handle ordinary threats, bandits, local monster populations, territorial disputes with neighbors. They were not prepared for the kind of existential threat that was beginning to manifest. In Victoria Island, the capital city of Hennessy's and the surrounding territories were governed by leaders who barely believed the old stories about the Black Mage. To them, the heroes were legends, the Great War was myth, and the idea that an ancient evil might return seemed like superstitious nonsense. In Ossyria, the various regions had their own problems. Lifra was dealing with Hilla's growing influence. El Nath was experiencing monster attacks of unprecedented scale. The Ludibrium toy factory had been infiltrated by the Black Mage's agents and was producing corrupted toys that spread chaos. Erive, the island kingdom ruled by the Empress of Cygnus, was one of the first modern powers to recognize the threat. The young Empress, guided by the spirit of the ancient dragon Shinsu, understood that the old evils were returning. She began to establish the Cygnus Knights, an elite order of warriors dedicated to protecting MapleWorld from threats both mundane and magical. The Resistance, an underground organization that fought against the machinations of the Black Mage's commanders, began to grow in strength and numbers. They operated in the shadows, fighting battles that the mainstream kingdoms didn't even know were happening. In Pantheon, the home of the Nova race, the twins Lotus and Orchid were manipulating events from behind the scenes, preparing for the Black Mage's return while maintaining the facade of being the Nova's leaders. And in isolated locations across MapleWorld, individuals began to manifest unusual powers, drawn by destiny or chance into the growing conflict. These would become the new generation of heroes, standing alongside the returned heroes of legend to face the darkness that was coming. Chapter 17. The Seal Breaks. The seal had held for centuries, sustained by the life force of the heroes and by the magical energy of MapleWorld itself. But nothing lasts forever, and the Black Mage's patient work from within, combined with the efforts of his commanders from without, finally bore fruit. The first cracks appeared subtly, so small that even the guardians who watched over the seal did not notice them immediately. But these tiny fractures grew, spreading through the structure of the seal like frost on a window. The Black Mage, sensing his opportunity, began to exert his full power against the weakened seal. The heroes, most of whom had already been released or had their life force diminished by the long centuries, could no longer sustain it fully. The seal began to fail catastrophically. The first sign was a pulse of dark energy that radiated out from the seal's location, washing across Maple World like a wave. Those sensitive to magic felt it as a moment of profound wrongness, as if reality itself had hiccuped. The sky darkened for a moment, and in that moment, everyone who looked up felt a primal fear that they could not explain. Then, the seal shattered. The Black Mage emerged from his prison unchanged by the centuries of confinement. If anything, the long period of enforced contemplation had only strengthened his resolve. He had had centuries to refine his plans, to consider every angle, to prepare for every contingency. He stood at the location of the broken seal and surveyed the world that had continued without him. A small smile crossed his face. The world had changed, but it was still fundamentally flawed, still filled with suffering and chaos. His purpose remained valid. His mission was still necessary. The Black Mage's first act upon his return was to summon his commanders to him. Hila, Damien, Magnus, Lotus, and Orchid, Guaru. They all answered the call, traveling from their various strongholds to stand before their master once more. He welcomed them back, praised them for their preparations, and gave them new orders. The time for subtlety was over. The time for open war had begun. They would conquer Maple World piece by piece, destroying resistance and gathering power. And when the world had been sufficiently weakened, he would complete the work he had begun centuries ago, the complete annihilation of the current world and the creation of a new, perfect one from the ashes. The commanders departed to begin their campaigns, and the Black Mage himself began to gather power. He established a new fortress, even more formidable than his old one, in a location that existed partially outside of normal space. From there, he could observe events across Maple World and direct his forces with perfect coordination. But the Black Mage's return did not go unopposed. Even as his commanders began their campaigns of conquest, resistance began to form. Chapter 18. The Grand Alliance. The returned heroes understood immediately what the Black Mage's escape meant. They had fought this war before, had sacrificed everything to stop him once, and now they would have to do it again. But this time, they could not afford to simply react to his moves. This time, they needed to be proactive, to unite all the forces of Maple World before the Black Mage could divide and conquer them. Mercedes took the lead in forging what would become known as the Grand Alliance. Drawing on her experience from the First War, she reached out to every kingdom, every faction, every organization that had the power to stand against the darkness. She traveled tirelessly across Maple World, speaking to leaders both great and small, convincing them that this threat was real and that only unity could save them. Some were easy to convince. The Empress Cygnus of Arave immediately pledged her Cygnus Knights to the Alliance. She had been preparing for this very eventuality, and she recognized Mercedes from the old stories. The Elf Queen and the young Empress formed a strong partnership, with Mercedes providing centuries of strategic experience and Cygnus offering the resources and legitimacy of a modern kingdom. The Resistance joined the Alliance as well, bringing their knowledge of the Black Mage's commanders and their networks of agents embedded in enemy territory. Their leader, a determined fighter who had lost family to the Black Mage's forces, saw in the Alliance the chance to finally strike back effectively against the darkness. Aran, still recovering her memories, nevertheless threw herself into the fight. She became one of the Alliance's front-line commanders, leading troops in battle after battle against the Black Mage's forces. Each fight brought back more memories, and with those memories came a deeper understanding of what they were fighting for and what they stood to lose. Phantom used his skills to establish an intelligence network for the Alliance. He recruited thieves, spies, and scouts from across Maple World, creating an organization that could track the movements of the Black Mage's commanders and provide early warning of attacks. He also took on more dangerous missions personally, infiltrating enemy strongholds to steal plans and sabotage operations. Luminous dedicated himself to countering the Black Mage's dark magic. He established a school for mages who could learn to balance light and darkness safely, creating a new generation of magical defenders who could stand against the corrupted magic of the enemy. He also studied the Black Mage's techniques, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. Evan and his dragon, though young and inexperienced, brought hope to the Alliance. The sight of a dragon master, even a novice one, reminded people of the legendary Freud and gave them confidence that the heroes of old had returned to save them once more. Evan grew quickly under the pressure of war, his bond with his dragon strengthening with each battle. And Shade, the successor to EunWol's legacy, worked tirelessly to recover the memory of the forgotten hero while also fighting on the front lines. Shade could feel EunWol's presence, trapped somewhere between existence and non-existence, and was determined to find a way to bring him back fully. But not everyone joined the Alliance willingly or quickly. Some kingdoms were too proud to accept leadership from ancient heroes who had been asleep for centuries. Some factions had old grudges against each other that they were unwilling to set aside even in the face of apocalypse. Some simply refused to believe that the threat was as serious as the heroes claimed. Mercedes found herself in countless diplomatic negotiations, some of which seemed harder than actual battles. She had to convince the stubborn leader of Hennesis that the threat was real. She had to mediate between the resistance and the formal military forces who distrusted the underground organization. She had to negotiate with the Dragon Afrian's descendants in Lifra, who were reluctant to involve themselves in what they saw as mortal affairs. Slowly, painfully, the alliance took shape. It was not perfect. There were too many competing interests, too many old rivalries, too many groups who cooperated reluctantly, rather than enthusiastically. But it was something, a unified front that could at least coordinate their defense against the Black Mage. The Alliance established its headquarters in Ereve, with command centers in other major locations across Maple World. They organized their forces into divisions, each responsible for defending a particular region or countering a specific threat. They established supply lines, communication networks, and evacuation protocols for civilian populations. And none too soon, for the Black Mage's commanders launched their first major offensives. Chapter 19. The Commander's Campaigns. Hilla struck first, her undead armies marching out from her necromantic tower in coordinated attacks across multiple regions. Her strategy was one of attrition. She did not need to win quick victories, only to keep raising the fallen as new soldiers for her armies. Every defender who died became a weapon in her hands. The Alliance forces that faced Hilla's undead legions found themselves in a nightmare scenario. Traditional tactics were less effective when the enemy felt no fear, no pain, and could not be demoralized. Worse, soldiers who fell in battle would rise again moments later as enemies, forcing their former comrades to destroy the bodies of their friends. Luminous took personal command of the anti-Hilla operations. He understood that necromancy, despite its fearsome appearance, had weaknesses. The undead were puppets, controlled by Hilla's will and sustained by her power. If he could disrupt that connection, he could turn her greatest strength into a liability. Luminous developed techniques specifically designed to counter necromantic magic. He taught Alliance mages how to sanctify battlefields, creating zones where the undead could not rise. He created magical items that could sever the connection between Hilla and her servants. And he led strike teams directly against Hilla herself, forcing her to focus on defense rather than expansion. The battles against Hilla's forces were brutal and grinding, but Luminous's tactics began to work. The undead armies were pushed back, territory was reclaimed, and Hilla found herself on the defensive in her own tower. Meanwhile, Magnus launched a conventional military campaign that showcased his brilliance as a strategist. He did not rely on dark magic or overwhelming force, but on tactics, misdirection, and exploiting his enemy's weaknesses. His army struck where the Alliance was weakest, withdrew before reinforcements could arrive, and then struck somewhere else entirely. Mercedes found herself in a chess match against Magnus, strategy against strategy. She had to anticipate his moves, position her forces to counter his attacks, and try to force him into battles on terms favorable to the Alliance. It was exhausting work that required constant vigilance. The campaign against Magnus became a war of maneuver and position. Both sides won and lost battles, gained and lost territory. Neither could gain a decisive advantage because both commanders were simply too skilled. The stalemate frustrated both sides, but it also prevented Magnus from making the kind of progress the Black Mage had hoped for. Damien's approach was different from either Hilla or Magnus. The demon commander fought not to conquer territory, but to destroy hope. He targeted locations of cultural or symbolic importance, places whose loss would demoralize the alliance even if they had little strategic value. Damien burned libraries that held irreplaceable knowledge. He destroyed monuments that had stood for centuries. He attacked hospitals and refugee centers, places where the vulnerable gathered. His goal was to break the spirit of those who opposed the Black Mage, to make them believe that resistance was futile. Aran took it upon herself to stop Damien. She understood the rage that drove him, the pain that fueled his destructive impulses. In a way, she saw herself in him, a warrior defined by their power and their anger. But where Aran had chosen to channel her fury toward protecting others, Damien had let his consume him entirely. Their battles were titanic clashes of raw power. When Aran and Damien fought, the landscape itself was reshaped by their conflict. Mountains were split, valleys were carved, and the very air crackled with energy. Neither could gain a clear advantage over the other. They were too evenly matched in power and determination. But Aran had something Damien lacked. She fought for something beyond herself. Every time she clashed with Damien, she was protecting people, saving lives, preserving hope. Damien fought only to destroy, and eventually that difference began to matter. In the ruins of a city Damien had attacked, Aran finally managed to wound him seriously, driving him back. As he retreated, she called out to him, asking him why he served the Black Mage, what he hoped to gain from all this destruction. Damien's only answer was a roar of rage and pain, but in that roar, Aran heard something else: despair. She began to wonder if Damien could be saved, if the hero he had once been might still exist somewhere beneath the demon he had become. The twins. Lotus and Orchid presented a different kind of challenge. They did not attack openly, but worked to undermine the alliance from within. Using their control over technology and their influence over the Nova, they spread misinformation, sabotaged equipment, and sowed discord among the alliance's members. Phantom took on the task of countering the twins' schemes. It became a game of spy versus spy, with Phantom's agents racing to uncover and stop the twins' plots before they could come to fruition. Some they stopped in time, others they did not, and the alliance suffered from internal conflicts and failed operations that could be traced back to the twins' interference. The conflict with Lotus and Orchid revealed something troubling. Not everyone in the alliance was truly committed to the cause. Some were there for their own gain, seeking power or position. Others harbored secret loyalties or could be bribed or blackmailed. The twins exploited these weaknesses ruthlessly. Phantom began to understand that defeating the Black Mage would require more than just military victory. They would need to address the fundamental flaws in their society that made people vulnerable to corruption in the first place. It was a sobering realization. Guaru's campaign was the most straightforward but also the most devastating. The massive commander simply gathered the largest monster army ever assembled and began a march of conquest across the continent. Subtlety was not in Guaru's nature. He relied on overwhelming force and unstoppable momentum. The alliance threw everything they had at Guaru's monster horde. Armies clashed in battles that involved hundreds of thousands of combatants on each side. The Cygnus Knights led cavalry charges that smashed into the monster lines. Resistance fighters used guerrilla tactics to harass Guaru's supply lines. Mages unleashed devastating spells that incinerated entire battalions. And yet, Guaru kept coming. For every monster the Alliance killed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The commander's own power was so immense that entire divisions could not stop him when he personally led an attack. It was Evan, the young dragon master, who finally found a way to slow Guaru's advance. Drawing on Freud's ancient knowledge, Evan performed a ritual that called upon the aid of the wild dragons, Afrian's descendants who had remained aloof from the conflict. When these mighty dragons joined the battle, even Guaru's horde could not stand against them. The tide began to turn against Gwaru, but the cost was terrible. The battles against his forces consumed resources the Alliance could barely afford. Entire regions were left devastated, their populations scattered, their infrastructure destroyed. Chapter 20. The Arcane River. As the war against the commanders raged, the Black Mage himself remained in his fortress, apparently content to let his subordinates fight while he focused on some larger plan. The Alliance's attempts to locate his fortress and attack him directly had all failed. It was as if the fortress existed in a space that conventional methods could not reach. Luminous, studying ancient texts and consulting with the most learned mages in the Alliance, made a disturbing discovery. The Black Mage's fortress was located beyond what he called the Arcane River, a mystical boundary that separated the normal world from regions of reality that were fundamentally different. The Arcane River was not a physical place that could be reached by conventional travel. It was a barrier in the fabric of reality itself, and crossing it required not just power, but a fundamental transformation of one's being. Those who attempted to cross the Arcane River without proper preparation would be obliterated, their existence erased from reality. But there were ways to cross safely, or at least more safely. Ancient techniques existed for preparing one's body and soul to withstand the transition. These techniques required gathering what Luminous called arcane power, a type of energy that existed beyond the normal spectrum of magic. The Alliance realized that if they wanted to take the fight directly to the Black Mage, they would need to venture beyond the Arcane River. A select group of the strongest fighters and most powerful mages would need to undergo the transformation necessary to survive in those hostile regions. Mercedes volunteered immediately, as did Aran, Phantom, Luminous, Evan, and Shade. Other powerful individuals from across the Alliance also stepped forward. Cygnus Knights, resistance fighters, independent heroes who had joined the cause. They began the process of gathering arcane power and preparing themselves for the journey beyond the Arcane River. It was a gradual process that could not be rushed. Attempting to cross the river without sufficient preparation would mean certain death. While the preparations continued, Luminous led an expedition to explore the edges of the Arcane River, to map the regions beyond and understand what they would face. What he discovered both amazed and terrified him. Beyond the Arcane River lay regions that defied natural law. The Vanishing Journey, where reality itself was unstable and locations would appear and disappear without warning. The Choo-Choo Island, where the properties of magic were fundamentally altered. The Lachalan, the city of dreams where the boundary between imagination and reality had dissolved. The Arcana, a forest where the spirits of the world gathered and where the past, present, and future existed simultaneously. The Morass, a swamp of dimensional instability where multiple realities overlapped. And finally, Esfera, the threshold to the Black Mage's fortress itself. Each of these regions presented unique challenges and required different approaches to navigate. The expedition barely survived their initial explorations, losing several members to the hostile environments. But they also discovered something hopeful. These regions, as dangerous as they were, contained secrets and sources of power that could be crucial in the final battle against the Black Mage. Ancient artifacts, forgotten knowledge, powerful allies who had been trapped in these spaces for centuries, all of these could potentially tip the balance in the Alliance's favor. The Alliance established outposts in the safer areas beyond the Arcane River, bases from which they could launch further expeditions. Slowly, painfully, they began to push deeper into these strange regions, gathering the resources and knowledge they would need for the final confrontation. Chapter 21. Revelations and Betrayals. As the Alliance prepared for their final push toward the Black Mage's fortress, several shocking revelations came to light that changed the nature of the entire conflict. The first revelation came from Phantom, whose spy network had finally managed to infiltrate the inner circle of one of the Black Mage's commanders. What they discovered was startling. Not all of the commanders were truly loyal to the Black Mage. Some served out of fear, others because they saw no alternative, and at least one was actively looking for a way to betray their master. That commander was Orchid, one of the twins. Through a complex series of messages passed through intermediaries, Orchid reached out to Phantom with an offer. She claimed that she had recovered some of her original memories, the memories from before the Black Mage had transformed her and her brother Lotus. She remembered being a princess, remembered having a life before she became a weapon. Orchid claimed she wanted to be free of the Black Mage's control, but she could not simply flee. The Black Mage had bound his commanders to himself with powerful magic. Breaking that bond would require external help, and it would need to happen at precisely the right moment, when the Black Mage was distracted and could not immediately retaliate. Phantom brought this information to Mercedes and the other heroes. They debated fiercely about whether to trust Orchid. It could be a genuine offer, a chance to turn one of the enemy's commanders into an ally. Or it could be a trap designed to lure them into a vulnerable position. Eventually, they decided to cautiously pursue the contact, but with extensive safeguards. If Orchid was genuine, her defection could provide crucial intelligence about the Black Mage's plans and capabilities. If it was a trap, they would be ready for it. The second revelation was even more disturbing. Luminous, deep in his studies of the Black Mage's magic, made a discovery about the nature of the seal that had imprisoned the Black Mage for centuries. The seal had not been perfect. They had known that. But what Luminous discovered was that its imperfection was not accidental. The Black Mage had intentionally allowed himself to be sealed. More than that, he had subtly influenced the heroes during their final battle, guiding them toward creating that specific type of seal. He had wanted to be imprisoned, at least temporarily. But why would the most powerful being in existence want to be sealed away for centuries? Luminous worked through the implications and arrived at a conclusion that chilled him to the core. The Black Mage had needed time. His plan to destroy and recreate the world was not something that could be done hastily. It required astronomical amounts of power, more than even he possessed. So he had arranged to be sealed, knowing that the seal would slowly drain power from Maple World itself over the centuries. All that power had not been used to maintain the seal. The seal had required some power, yes, but not as much as it had actually drained. The rest of that power had been siphoned off by the Black Mage himself, stored and accumulated over hundreds of years. Now, after centuries of passive accumulation, the Black Mage had more than enough power to complete his work. The seal had not been his prison, it had been his chrysalis, a stage in his metamorphosis from immensely powerful to functionally omnipotent. When Luminous shared this information with the Alliance, despair rippled through the ranks. How could they fight an enemy who was that far ahead of them, who had planned for centuries and manipulated even his own imprisonment to serve his purposes? But Mercedes rallied them. She reminded them that the first time they had fought the Black Mage, the odds had seemed just as impossible. They had found a way then, and they would find a way now. They had more allies this time, more resources, more knowledge. And most importantly, they had something the Black Mage did not, genuine hope, not the cold certainty of a predetermined plan, but the vibrant, chaotic hope that came from fighting for something you loved. The third revelation came from an unexpected source, EunWol himself, or rather, the fragment of EunWol that Shade had managed to recover from the void of non-existence. EunWol's consciousness, fractured and incomplete, conveyed a message that Shade struggled to interpret. It had something to do with the nature of the Black Mage's transformation, with what had happened when the White Mage had touched the ultimate light and ultimate darkness. Shade brought this fragmented message to Luminous, who as a former disciple of the White Mage might be able to interpret it. Together, they pieced together EunWol's meaning, and what they discovered added a new dimension to everything they thought they knew about the conflict. The White Mage had not become the Black Mage through corruption or external influence. He had not been possessed or transformed against his will. Rather, when he touched the ultimate light and ultimate darkness simultaneously, he had been split. The ultimate light had remained the White Mage, and the ultimate darkness had become the Black Mage. But they were still fundamentally the same being, two halves of a sundered whole. The White Mage still existed somewhere, separated from the Black Mage, but still connected to him. This revelation changed everything. It meant that the Black Mage was not simply an evil to be destroyed, but a broken thing that might potentially be healed. If they could find the White Mage, if they could reunite the two halves, perhaps the original being could be restored, and perhaps that restored being would not want to destroy the world. It was a slim hope, but it was hope nonetheless. Chapter 22. The Path to Tenebris. With these revelations in hand, the Alliance adjusted their strategy. Their goal was no longer simply to defeat the Black Mage, but to find a way to restore the White Mage. But they still needed to reach the Black Mage's fortress, to confront him directly, and to survive long enough to attempt whatever ritual might reunite the sundered being. The strongest members of the Alliance, those who had successfully gathered sufficient arcane power, began their journey through the regions beyond the Arcane River. It was a harrowing expedition that tested them in ways they had never been tested before. In the vanishing journey, they had to navigate through a landscape that constantly shifted and changed. Paths that had been there moments before would disappear, leaving them stranded in hostile territory. Reality itself seemed to reject their presence, and they had to fight not just monsters, but the fundamental instability of the region. Mercedes led them through this chaos, her centuries of experience allowing her to find patterns in the apparent randomness. She taught them to read the subtle signs that preceded a shift in reality, to anticipate changes before they occurred, to move with the flow of the unstable landscape rather than fighting against it. In Choo Choo Island, they found a place where the inhabitants had adapted to the altered magical properties by developing unique techniques and technologies. The Choo Choo people, small creatures of surprising resilience, had managed to build a civilization in this inhospitable place. The Alliance members spent time learning from the Choo Choo, understanding how magic worked differently here, and adapting their own abilities accordingly. Evan in particular bonded with the Choo Choo, his dragon fascinated by the unique magical environment. La Chaline, the city of dreams, was perhaps the most dangerous region they encountered. Here, the boundary between dreams and reality had dissolved completely. The city's inhabitants were trapped in endless dreams, unable to wake, unable to distinguish their fantasies from truth. The Alliance members had to guard their minds carefully, lest they too become lost in the dream. Phantom nearly succumbed, falling into a dream where Mercedes remembered and returned his love, where they could have the relationship that had been denied to them. It was Aran who pulled him out, her warrior's discipline and her recovered memories giving her the strength to resist the dream's allure. In La Chaline, they also encountered a mysterious figure known as the Dreamkeeper, a being who seemed to exist between dreaming and waking. The Dreamkeeper gave them cryptic warnings about what lay ahead and provided them with techniques to guard their minds against the Black Mage's mental assaults. The Arcana was a place of profound beauty and terrible danger. Here, the spirits of the world gathered, and the past, present, and future existed simultaneously. The Alliance members saw visions of their own pasts, of the original war against the Black Mage, of possible futures both bright and dark. Luminous was particularly affected by the Arcana. Here, he saw visions of the White Mage as he had been before the transformation, teaching his disciples, protecting the innocent, embodying the ideals that had inspired Luminous to follow him in the first place. The visions strengthened Luminous's resolve to find a way to save his former master, but they also encountered a spirit who warned them that the path they were on led to sacrifice. Someone would have to give up everything to restore the White Mage, to heal the sundered being. The cost would be no less than it had been the first time they had sealed the Black Mage. In the morass, where multiple realities overlapped, they experienced firsthand the consequences of the Black Mage's plan. This region was a preview of what would happen if the Black Mage succeeded in destroying the current world. Reality would collapse into chaos, all possible timelines existing simultaneously, order giving way to entropy. They fought through the morass with renewed urgency, knowing that they absolutely could not fail. The morass was what awaited all of Maple World if the Black Mage completed his work. And finally, they reached Esfera, the threshold to the Black Mage's fortress. Here, the energy of creation and destruction existed in raw form, barely contained. The fortress itself was visible in the distance, a structure that seemed to be made of crystallized impossibility, constantly shifting between existing and not existing. At Esfera, they made their final preparations. They knew that once they entered the fortress, there would be no turning back. This would be the final battle, the ultimate confrontation that would determine the fate of Maple World and everyone in it. Before entering the fortress, the heroes took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. They had been awakened from centuries of sleep, had adapted to a world that had moved on without them, had forged a new alliance and led it through countless battles, and had journeyed through regions of reality that no one had successfully navigated before. They thought of all those who had fallen along the way, the soldiers who had died in the battles against the commanders, the innocent civilians who had been caught in the crossfire, their friends and allies who had sacrificed everything for this moment. And they thought of the White Mage, of the hero he had been before he became the Black Mage, of the possibility that they might yet save him from himself. With these thoughts in their hearts, the heroes entered the fortress of Tenebris, ready to face the Black Mage one final time. Chapter 20. 3. Within the fortress. The interior of the Black Mage's fortress defied description. It was not a physical place in any conventional sense, but rather a manifestation of the Black Mage's will, a space where reality bent to his desires. Gravity was optional, time flowed inconsistently, and the very concepts of up and down, forward and backward lost their meaning. The Alliance forces that had made it this far split into teams, each with a specific objective. Some would fight the remaining commanders who had retreated to the fortress for a final stand. Others would disable the fortress's defenses and power sources, and the heroes themselves would push through to the throne room where the Black Mage waited. The battles within the fortress were desperate and chaotic. Hilla made her last stand surrounded by an army of undead that she had been accumulating for this very moment. Luminous and his mages fought through wave after wave of the undead, finally reaching Hilla herself. When Luminous confronted Hilla, he offered her one final chance to stand down, to abandon the Black Mage's service. She laughed at the offer. She had nothing without the Black Mage, no power, no purpose, no identity. She would serve him until the very end, and if that end came in this fortress, so be it. Luminous defeated Hilla, sealing away her necromantic powers and leaving her powerless. But he did not kill her. Even now, even after everything, he held to the hope that enemies could be redeemed, that those who had fallen to darkness could be brought back to the light. Magnus coordinated the defense of the fortress with the same strategic brilliance he had shown throughout the war. But Mercedes was his equal, and she had something he lacked, an army that fought not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine belief in their cause. Their final confrontation was a battle of wits as much as arms. Magnus threw every tactic, every stratagem, every trick he had learned in his long life at Mercedes and her forces. But Mercedes countered each one, matching his brilliance with her own, neutralizing his advantages. In the end, Magnus was defeated not by superior strategy, but by the simple fact that his soldiers gave up before he did. They saw that the battle was lost, that the Black Mage's cause was doomed, and they had no loyalty deep enough to make them fight to the death. Magnus found himself alone, his army scattered or surrendered, facing Mercedes with no pieces left to play. Mercedes offered Magnus the chance to surrender with honor. To her surprise, he accepted. Magnus had always been a pragmatist, and he could see that the Black Mage's plan was falling apart. Better to survive and perhaps find redemption than to die for a lost cause. Aran's final battle with Damien was the most brutal of all the confrontations. They fought through the corridors of the fortress, their clash of power tearing apart the impossible architecture. Aran had been holding back in their previous encounters, hoping to reach the hero Damien had once been. But here, in the final battle, she could hold back no longer. She pushed Damien to his absolute limit, matching his demonic power with her warrior's fury. And as she fought, she talked to him, reminding him of who he had been, asking him if this was truly what he wanted, if endless rage and destruction were really preferable to finding peace. Damien's only answer was to fight harder, to push himself beyond his limits, to channel more and more power until his body began to break down under the strain. Aran realized with horror that Damien was trying to kill himself, to end his existence in a final blaze of destruction rather than face the possibility of moving beyond his rage. She could not allow that. Despite everything, despite all the destruction Damien had caused, Aran saw in him a fellow warrior who had been broken by the cruelty of the world. She shifted her tactics, no longer trying to defeat him but to restrain him, to stop him from destroying himself. In the end, Aran succeeded in subduing Damien, but only barely. He lay broken and powerless, and for the first time the rage faded from his eyes, replaced by tears. He wept for what he had lost, for who he had become, for the brother he had failed to protect, and the mother he had been unable to save. Aran stayed with him, offering not judgment but understanding. She told him that his story was not over, that he could still choose a different path. It was a fragile hope, but it was there. Phantom's confrontation with Lotus and Orchid was complicated by Orchid's offer of betrayal. When the battle began, it quickly became clear that Orchid had been sincere. She turned on her brother, attacking him while Phantom's forces engaged the rest of their defenses. Lotus was shocked and hurt by his sister's betrayal. They had been together through everything, had survived the Black Mage's experiments and the long centuries that followed. How could she turn on him now? Orchid's answer was simple, she remembered. She remembered being human, being a princess, having dreams and hopes beyond serving the Black Mage. She wanted her life back, even if that meant fighting her own brother. The battle between the twins was heartbreaking to witness. Despite everything, they still cared for each other, and every blow they exchanged was accompanied by pleas for the other to stand down. Eventually, Phantom intervened, separating them and using his stolen magic to break the Black Mage's control over both of them. Free of the Black Mage's binding, both twins collapsed, their cybernetic enhancements shutting down. They were left barely alive, but finally, truly free for the first time in centuries. Evan and Shade fought through the fortress together, complementing each other's abilities perfectly. Evan's dragon magic and Shade's fox spirit techniques created a synergy that devastated the fortress's defenses. They reached Guaru, who had been tasked with defending one of the fortress's key power sources. The battle against Guaru was one of pure power against power. But Evan and Shade had learned something crucial. Guaru's monstrous strength came at the cost of his intelligence and tactical thinking. He was a blunt instrument, devastating but predictable. They used this against him, luring him into traps, exhausting him with hit-and-run tactics, and ultimately bringing him down through coordination and strategy rather than matching his raw power. When Guaru fell, a crucial section of the fortress's defenses fell with him. With the commanders defeated or neutralized, the path to the Black Mage's throne room lay open. Chapter 24. The Truth Revealed. The heroes gathered at the entrance to the Black Mage's throne room. Mercedes, Aran, Phantom, Luminous, Evan, and Shade stood together, battered and exhausted from their journey through the fortress, but still determined. Behind them, Alliance soldiers held the corridors they had fought so hard to reach, ensuring that no reinforcements could interfere with what was to come. The doors to the throne room were massive, constructed of a substance that seemed to absorb light itself. Ancient runes covered their surface, pulsing with dark energy. Luminous stepped forward and examined them, recognizing the script as something the White Mage had taught him centuries ago. "These runes," Luminous said quietly, "they're not meant to keep us out. They're meant to ensure that whoever enters understands what they're walking into. It's a warning." "What does it say?" Mercedes asked. Luminous read the ancient script aloud. "Beyond this threshold lies the end of all things and the beginning of everything. Those who enter must choose, accept the truth and transcend, or cling to illusion and perish. There is no middle path." The heroes exchanged glances. After everything they had been through, cryptic warnings were not going to stop them now. Together, they pushed open the doors and entered the throne room. The chamber beyond was vast, stretching in impossible directions. The walls seemed to show images from across time and space. The history of Maple World played out in countless scenes simultaneously. The ceiling opened onto what appeared to be the cosmos itself, stars and galaxies wheeling overhead in accelerated time. And at the center of it all, seated on a throne that seemed to be carved from frozen void, was the Black Mage. He looked exactly as he had centuries ago when they had first sealed him, unchanged and unchanging. His black robes flowed around him as if moved by a wind that existed only for him. His eyes, when he looked at the heroes, held an expression that was neither angry nor fearful, but something closer to sadness. "You have come far," the Black Mage said, his voice resonating through the chamber. "Farther than I anticipated, truth be told. I had thought the journey through the arcane river regions would be beyond even your capabilities. But you have always been remarkable, haven't you? That is why I chose you." "Chose us?" Mercedes stepped forward, her bow drawn. "You chose us for nothing. We chose to stand against you." The Black Mage smiled slightly. "Did you? Are you certain? Tell me, Mercedes, Queen of the Elves, why did you leave EunWol all those centuries ago? You could have kept your people safe in their forest sanctuary. The darkness would have come eventually, yes, but you could have had decades, perhaps centuries of peace before that. Why did you choose to fight?" Mercedes's eyes narrowed. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because no one else could. Because I needed you to," the Black Mage said softly. "I needed heroes, you see. Powerful, determined individuals who could stand against me, who could challenge me, who could push me to my limits. You were the finest of your age, each of you. And so I ensured that you would find each other, that you would unite, that you would become the heroes who opposed me." Aran raised her polearm threateningly. "You're saying you orchestrated your own opposition? That's insane." "Is it?" The Black Mage gestured, and the images on the wall shifted, showing scenes from the First War. "Watch. See how each of you was guided to your role. Mercedes, the attack on EunWol that forced you to act, that was my commander's work, yes, but it was designed not to destroy but to motivate. Aran, the invasion of your homeland was calculated to create a warrior with the perfect combination of skill and rage. Phantom, the destruction of the city you cared for, was timed precisely to turn you from a thief into a hero." The images continued, showing moment after moment where the Black Mage's forces had acted in ways that seemed designed not to win, but to create specific responses. Freud, the threats to the dragons that convinced them to involve themselves in mortal affairs. Luminous, the betrayals and revelations that set you on the path to balance light and darkness. EunWol, the suffering you witnessed that awakened your connection to the fox spirits. All of it was necessary. All of it was planned. Luminous stepped forward, his hands crackling with both light and dark energy. "Even if that's true, even if you somehow manipulated events to create us as your opponents, it doesn't matter. We're here now, and we're going to stop you." The Black Mage rose from his throne, and the simple act of him standing sent ripples of power through the chamber. "Stop me from what? Do you even understand what I'm trying to accomplish? You speak of stopping me as if I were some villain from a children's story, motivated by hatred or greed or simple madness. But you know that's not true. You, Luminous, you know me better than any of them. Tell them what the White Mage truly wanted." Luminous hesitated, memories of his time as the White Mage's disciple flooding back. You wanted to protect everyone, to create a world without suffering. "Yes," the Black Mage said, "that goal has not changed, it has only evolved. When I was the White Mage, I believed that I could protect the world through my power, that I could stand as an eternal guardian against all threats. But I was wrong. No matter how powerful I became, no matter how many threats I defeated, suffering continued. Do you know why?" He gestured, and the images on the walls changed again, showing scenes of tragedy and pain from across MapleStory's history. Wars, famines, diseases, natural disasters, personal tragedies small and large. Because suffering is built into the very structure of existence. The world, not just Maple World, but all worlds, all of reality, is fundamentally flawed. It is constructed on principles that guarantee conflict, decay, and death. No amount of protection can change that. The only way to eliminate suffering is to eliminate the flawed reality that creates it. Mercedes shook her head. So, your solution is to destroy everything? To kill everyone? How is that better? Because what comes after will be better, the Black Mage said with absolute conviction. When I touched the ultimate light and ultimate darkness, I saw beyond the boundaries of this reality. I saw what could be, what should be. I saw the possibility of a perfect existence, one constructed on better principles, where suffering is not an inevitability, but an impossibility. But everyone alive now will die, Evan said, his dragon growling beside him. How can you justify that? The Black Mage turned his gaze to the young Dragon Master. Death is not the end. That is one of the fundamental truths I learned. Consciousness, the essential self, persists beyond physical death. When I destroy this reality and create the new one, those consciousnesses will be reborn into the perfect world. They will have no memory of the suffering they endured in this flawed existence. They will know only joy, only peace, only perfection. You can't know that, Phantom said. You're gambling with the lives of everyone who exists on the chance that your theory is correct. It is not a theory. It is certainty. The Black Mage's voice carried absolute confidence. I have seen it. When I touched the ultimate forces, I was granted vision beyond mortal or immortal comprehension. I know what will happen. I know what must happen, and nothing you do can change that. Shade spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but firm. Then why did you allow us to seal you? Why did you let us interfere if you're so certain of your path? The Black Mage smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. Because I needed you to make a choice. The new reality I will create cannot be imposed by fiat. It requires consent, in a sense. Not the consent of every individual, but the consent of existence itself. And existence speaks through its champions, through its heroes. He gestured to the 6 of them. You are the finest that this reality has produced. You represent the best of what the current world can offer. And so I gave you the choice. You could accept what I offer, help me create the new world, and be reborn into it as its guardians and guides. Or you could fight me, try to preserve this flawed reality, and in your defeat, provide the final proof that even the best this world can produce is insufficient to prevent its own destruction. The heroes stood in stunned silence as the implications of the Black Mage's words sank in. He had not been fighting them, he had been testing them. Everything, from the first war to their awakening in the modern age, had been part of this test. There is a third option, Luminous said slowly. The White Mage. He still exists, separated from you. We can reunite you, restore the original being. Perhaps then you would see that there are other ways. The Black Mage's expression shifted, and for just a moment, something like pain crossed his features. Ah, you discovered that, did you? Yes, the White Mage still exists, or rather, the portion of the original being that could not accept the truth of what I learned. When I touched the ultimate forces, I was split. The part that could accept the necessary conclusion became me, and the part that clung to the old ways became him. Where is he? Mercedes demanded. Let us speak with him. The Black Mage gestured, and a doorway appeared in the wall of the throne room. He is here. He has always been here, imprisoned within this fortress, within my own being. I have kept him safe all these centuries because despite our division, we are still fundamentally the same person. I could no more destroy him than I could destroy myself. The heroes moved toward the doorway, but the Black Mage raised a hand. Before you go to him, understand this, he will tell you that I am wrong, that there is another way. He will beg you to stop me, to save this world. But he speaks from ignorance, from the limited perspective of one who refused to accept the full truth. Listen to him if you must, but know that his path leads only to prolonging the inevitable suffering of existence. Chapter 25. The White Mage's Prison. The heroes passed through the doorway and found themselves in a space that was the complete opposite of the Black Mage's throne room. Where that chamber had been vast and dark, filled with cosmic vistas and overwhelming power, this space was small, bright, and almost painfully simple. It was a single room, comfortably furnished, with walls of white stone and soft light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Books lined shelves on every wall, and in the center of the room, seated at a simple wooden desk, was the White Mage. He looked exactly as Luminous remembered him from centuries ago. White robes, kind eyes, a gentle smile that had inspired countless disciples to follow his teachings. When he saw the heroes enter, his smile widened with genuine joy. "My friends," he said, rising from his desk. "You found me. I had hoped you would, but I feared that he might have prevented it." His eyes locked onto Luminous, and tears began to form. "My student, my dear student, you have grown so much. I am proud of you." Luminous felt his own eyes burning with tears. This was the teacher he remembered, the one he had loved and respected before everything went wrong. "Master," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we've come to save you, to reunite you with him, to restore you to what you were." The White Mage's smile faded slightly. Yes, reunification. That is the obvious solution, isn't it? But I fear it is not so simple." He gestured for them to sit, manifesting chairs from nothing. "Let me tell you what happened, the truth that he will not acknowledge." The heroes sat, and the White Mage began to speak. "When I performed the ritual to touch the ultimate light and ultimate darkness, I believed I was prepared for whatever I might find. I was the most powerful being in existence. I had studied for centuries. I thought there was no truth I could not accept, no knowledge that could break me." He paused, his expression growing distant. "I was wrong. When I touched those ultimate forces, I experienced everything. I saw all of reality laid bare, understood the fundamental principles that govern existence. And what I saw, it broke me." "The Black Mage says that reality is fundamentally flawed," Mercedes said. "That suffering is inevitable. Is that true?" The White Mage nodded slowly. "Yes. In the current configuration of reality, yes, suffering is inevitable. The universe operates on principles of duality, of opposition. Light requires darkness to define it. Joy requires darkness to define it. Joy requires sorrow to give it meaning. Life requires death to maintain balance. These are not arbitrary choices, but fundamental laws as basic as mathematics." "Then he's right?" Aran said, disbelief in her voice. "Destroying everything is the only answer?" "No." The White Mage stood abruptly, passion in his voice. "This is where he and I diverge. Yes, I saw that the current reality is flawed. But I also saw something else, something he refused to accept. I saw that those flaws have value." The White Mage began to pace, his words coming faster now. "Suffering is terrible, yes. But it is also the crucible in which compassion is forged. Conflict is destructive, but it also drives growth and change. Death is painful, but it gives life meaning. The very flaws in reality create the possibility for courage, for love, for sacrifice, for all the virtues that make existence worthwhile." He turned to face them directly. "The Black Mage wants to create a reality without suffering, but such a reality would also be without genuine choice. It would be static, unchanging, perfect in the way a crystal is perfect. Beautiful, but dead. He saw the flaws and decided they must be eliminated. I saw the same flaws and decided they must be accepted, even embraced, because they are inseparable from everything that makes existence meaningful." Phantom leaned forward. "So when you touched the ultimate forces, you split because you couldn't reconcile these two perspectives?" "Exactly," the White Mage confirmed. "The experience of touching both ultimate light and ultimate darkness was so overwhelming that it fractured my psyche. The part of me that could not accept the flaws became the Black Mage, devoted to destroying and remaking reality. The part of me that could accept them remained as me, but powerless, imprisoned here while he pursues his grand design. Then if we reunite you, Luminous said, which perspective will dominate? The White Mage's expression became sad. That is the question, isn't it? The truth is, I don't know. We are the same being, divided. If we reunite, we might synthesize our perspectives into something new, a balance between acceptance and the desire for improvement. Or one perspective might dominate the other. Or we might simply fracture again, unable to contain contradictory truths within a single consciousness. Evan's dragon spoke, its voice resonant in the small room. There is another danger. The Black Mage has been gathering power for centuries, preparing to reshape reality. If you reunite with him, that power will be part of you as well. Can you be certain you could control it, that you wouldn't be overwhelmed by it? The White Mage shook his head. I cannot be certain of anything. I am the part that doubts, that questions, that sees multiple possibilities. He is the part that is certain, that knows, that sees only one path. Together we might be whole, or we might be something worse than either of us alone. Mercedes stood, her decision made. Then we can't reunite you. It's too risky. We'll have to defeat the Black Mage as he is. You cannot, the White Mage said gently. Believe me, I have spent centuries in this prison trying to find a way to stop him from within, to sabotage his plans or weaken his power. But we are too connected. I cannot act against him without acting against myself. And from the outside you cannot defeat him because he wields both ultimate light and ultimate darkness. Any attack you make he can counter. Any defense you erect he can penetrate. He is functionally invincible. There must be a way, Shade insisted. There's always a way. The White Mage sat back down, looking suddenly very tired. There is one possibility, but it requires a sacrifice even greater than the one you made when you sealed him the first time. And I am not certain it would even work. The heroes leaned in, listening intently. The Black Mage's plan requires him to unmake reality and remake it. To do this, he must achieve what is called transcendence. He must place himself outside of reality in a position where he can manipulate it as an artist manipulates clay. The process of achieving transcendence is delicate. For a brief moment, as he transitions from being within reality to being outside it, he will be vulnerable. Vulnerable how? Aran asked. During that moment of transition, he will be neither here nor there, neither within reality nor outside it. In that instant, he could be disrupted. If someone were to attack him at precisely that moment, not with physical force, but with an attack on the conceptual level, they could prevent the transcendence from completing. He would be trapped in the space between, unable to return to reality or to step outside it. Luminous saw the problem immediately. But to attack him on a conceptual level, at precisely the right moment, would require someone to be in the same space, undergoing the same transition. Someone would have to attempt transcendence at the exact same moment he does. Yes, the White Mage confirmed. And whoever does so, whoever makes that sacrifice, will be trapped in that between space with him. They will not die, but neither will they truly live. They will exist in a state of eternal struggle, holding him back, preventing him from achieving transcendence, but also preventing themselves from returning to reality. It would be a sacrifice of everything, not just life, but existence itself. The room fell silent as the heroes absorbed this information. After everything they had been through, all the battles they had fought and the obstacles they had overcome, it came down to this. Someone would have to sacrifice not just their life, but their very existence to stop the Black Mage. There's something else, the White Mage said quietly. Whoever makes this sacrifice must do so willingly, with full understanding of what they're giving up. The attack must be made with absolute conviction, without hesitation or doubt. If there is even a moment of uncertainty, it will fail, and the Black Mage will achieve transcendence. How do we know when he'll attempt transcendence? Phantom asked. Soon, the White Mage replied. Very soon, the White Mage replied. Very soon. All his preparations are complete. The power he's gathered, the weakening of reality's barriers, the defeat of his commanders, all of this has been leading to this moment. In fact, I suspect he's waiting for this very conversation to conclude. He wants you to understand what's at stake, to make your choice with full knowledge. Mercedes stood, her bearing regal despite the exhaustion evident in her features. Then we need to decide which of us will make this sacrifice. Chapter 20. 6. The Choice. The heroes returned to the throne room to find the Black Mage exactly where they had left him, standing before his throne as if he had not moved at all during their absence. His expression was unreadable as they approached. "You spoke with him," the Black Mage said. "It was not a question. And he told you of the only way to stop me, the sacrifice of one of yourselves to prevent my transcendence." "He did," Mercedes confirmed. "And we want to know, is he right? Is that truly the only way to stop you?" The Black Mage nodded slowly. "It is. I will not lie to you, not at this final juncture. If one of you attempts transcendence at the same moment I do, and if that person strikes at me during the transition, it could prevent me from completing the process. We would both be trapped in the between space, locked in eternal stalemate." "Why are you telling us this?" Aran demanded. "Why not just attempt transcendence before we're ready, before we can stop you?" "Because," the Black Mage said, and there was something almost like tenderness in his voice, "I need you to choose. I told you before, the new reality I wish to create requires consent, not of individuals, but of existence itself. And existence speaks through its champions. If you choose to sacrifice one of your number to stop me, it proves that existence values its current flawed state enough to pay any price to preserve it. And if that is the choice existence makes, then perhaps I am wrong. Perhaps the flaws have value I cannot see." He spread his hands. "But if you cannot make that choice, if the cost is too high, if you step aside and allow me to proceed, then it proves that even the finest heroes this reality can produce recognize the necessity of what I'm doing. Either way, I will have my answer." Luminous stepped forward. "It should be me. I was your disciple. I learned from you, followed you. It's fitting that I be the one to stop you, or try to." "No," Mercedes said immediately. "You're too valuable. The Alliance needs mages who understand the balance of light and darkness. It should be me. I'm the one who brought everyone together. It's my responsibility." Aran shook her head. "You're the best strategist we have. The world will need leadership after this is over, someone who can rebuild and maintain alliances. I'm just a warrior. My purpose has always been to fight. Let me make this fight count." "None of you understand," Phantom said quietly. "I'm the one who should do this. I've spent my whole life taking from others. Let me give something back. Let me give everything back." Evan and his dragon spoke simultaneously, their voices overlapping. "We inherited Freud's legacy. We carry the memory of the Dragon Masters. That legacy deserves to continue through us in this final sacrifice." Shade was silent for a long moment before speaking. "I already know what it's like to be forgotten, to have my existence erased. I am the successor to EunWol, the forgotten hero. Perhaps it's fitting that I follow in his footsteps one final time." The Black Mage watched this exchange with an expression that might have been sorrow. "You are all willing to give up everything. Each of you has a reason why it should be you. This is both beautiful and tragic. The very compassion and selflessness you display are products of the flawed reality I wish to remake, proof of both its potential and its pain." He raised his hand, and the chamber began to change. The walls became transparent, showing views of MapleWorld beyond. Cities where people went about their daily lives, unaware that their entire existence hung in the balance. Families laughing together, children playing, lovers embracing, merchants bargaining, warriors training, mages studying, the infinite complexity of life in all its forms. "Look at them," the Black Mage said. "Every single one will suffer before they die. Their loved ones will die. They will experience loss, pain, betrayal, heartbreak. Their children will know the same suffering, and their children's children, on and on forever, because that is the nature of this reality. Is that really worth preserving? Is that really worth the sacrifice you're prepared to make? The heroes looked at the scenes unfolding before them. And yes, they could see the potential for suffering the Black Mage described, but they could also see something else. They saw the merchant who charged fair prices because she valued her customers as people, not just sources of profit. They saw the warrior who trained not for glory, but to protect those weaker than himself. They saw the mother comforting her crying child, teaching him that pain passes and tomorrow brings new hope. They saw friends supporting each other through hardships. They saw communities coming together in times of crisis. They saw love, resilience, creativity, courage, compassion, all the things that made life worth living despite its hardships. Yes, Mercedes said firmly, it's worth it. Not because this world is perfect, but because it's real. The people living their lives out there. They're not theoretical constructs to be optimized. They're individuals with their own dreams, their own choices, their own stories. You want to erase all of that and replace it with your vision of perfection, but perfection without choice is just another form of prison. The Black Mage lowered his hand and the visions faded. Then you have made your choice. One of you will sacrifice themselves to stop me. But which one? How will you decide? The heroes looked at each other, and in that moment they realized something. They were arguing about who should make the sacrifice, but in truth, any one of them would be willing. They were all heroes, all people who had dedicated their lives to protecting others. The question wasn't who was willing to sacrifice themselves, they all were. But who could best succeed at the task? Luminous spoke first. It has to be someone who understands the nature of transcendence, who has studied the principles that govern reality, that eliminates Aran, Evan, and Shade. No offense. None taken, Aran said. You're right, this isn't a battle that can be won with a polearm. Between Mercedes, Phantom, and myself then, Luminous continued. Mercedes, you're needed to lead the Alliance after this is over. The world will be in chaos. They'll need someone who can unite them, rebuild, maintain order. Phantom, your intelligence network will be crucial for keeping the peace and preventing new threats from rising. Phantom smiled his characteristic smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. And you, Luminous, are the only one who truly understands both light and darkness, who can teach that balance to future generations. By your own logic, you're too valuable to sacrifice as well. They were at an impasse, each making convincing arguments for why the other should live and they should die. It was the White Mage who broke the stalemate. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking into the throne room from his prison. There is another option, one that none of you have considered. The Black Mage's expression shifted, surprise crossing his features for the first time. You cannot mean. I do, the White Mage said. Luminous, you spoke of reuniting us, of restoring the original being. What if that reunification happens not in safety, but during the moment of transcendence? If the Black Mage and I were to merge while he attempts to step outside reality, the resulting being would be neither him nor me, but something new, something whole. The Black Mage shook his head. It's too dangerous. The shock of reunification during transcendence could destroy us both, could create something worse than either of us. Or it could create something better, the White Mage countered, a being that understands both the flaws of reality and their value, one that has touched the ultimate forces but is not consumed by them, one that could choose a third path, neither destroying reality nor leaving it unchanged, but guiding it toward genuine improvement without annihilation. Luminous understood immediately. You're talking about sacrificing both of you, the Black Mage and the White Mage, to create a new being that would be trapped in the between space. A being that would hold the line between reality and unreality forever. Yes, the White Mage said, it is still a sacrifice. The being we would become would not be able to return to normal existence. But it would be a choice we both make, a reunification that we both accept. And it would spare any of you from having to give up your lives. The Black Mage was silent for a long moment. The heroes could see the conflict playing across his features as he considered the White Mage's proposal. Finally he spoke, his voice softer than they had ever heard it. "I do not want to die, or cease to exist, or whatever state we would enter. I have worked for centuries toward my goal. I have sacrificed everything, including my own humanity, to achieve transcendence. To abandon it now, at the moment of completion." "I know," the White Mage said gently. "But answer me this, my other self. If you truly believed that destroying and remaking reality was the only way, why did you test the heroes? Why give them the chance to stop you? Why not simply achieve transcendence before they could interfere?" The Black Mage closed his eyes. Because a part of me hopes I am wrong. A part of me still remembers being the protector, the guardian who loved the world despite its flaws. A part of me has spent centuries trying to convince myself that what I'm doing is necessary, because the alternative is to admit that I threw away everything for nothing. "Then let us reunite," the White Mage said, "not to create a perfect world, but to ensure this imperfect one continues. We can be what we were always meant to be. Not the savior who remakes reality, but the guardian who protects it. We can find peace in accepting our role, in embracing the paradox of being powerful enough to destroy everything but choosing instead to preserve it." The throne room seemed to hold its breath as the Black Mage considered. The heroes watched, knowing that their words could not influence this decision. This was between the two halves of a sundered being, a conversation that had been centuries in the making. Finally, the Black Mage opened his eyes and smiled. A genuine, warm smile that reminded them all of who he had been before the transformation. "Very well," he said. "Let us go home." Chapter 27, Reunification. The process of reunification was not something that could be done hastily or carelessly. The Black Mage and the White Mage had been separate for centuries, and merging them would require a ritual of tremendous complexity and power. The Black Mage released the White Mage from his prison, and for the first time since the original transformation, the two halves of the original being stood face to face. They were mirror images, one in black robes, one in white, one radiating darkness, the other light, but both clearly two parts of the same whole. "I will need help," the Black Mage said, addressing the heroes. The ritual of reunification must happen simultaneously with the attempt at transcendence. As we merge, I will begin the process of stepping outside reality. The merged being will exist in the between space, holding the boundary between existence and non-existence. But to succeed, I will need you to anchor the ritual, to provide stability during the transition. The heroes agreed immediately. After everything, they could do this small thing. The Black Mage began to inscribe a massive ritual circle on the floor of the throne room, covering it with symbols and runes that represented fundamental concepts, unity and division, existence and non-existence, permanence and change. The White Mage worked alongside him, their movements perfectly synchronized as if they were already one being. As they worked, the Black Mage spoke to the heroes, his voice carrying a warmth that had been absent during all their previous interactions. "I want you to know that I am sorry. For the pain I caused, for the lives lost in the war, for the suffering I inflicted in pursuit of what I believed was a greater good. I was wrong, not about reality being flawed, but about my solution being the only answer." Mercedes stepped forward. "What happens after? Once you're merged and holding the boundary in the between space?" "The world will stabilize," the Black Mage explained. "The damage to reality that I caused in my attempts to weaken it for transcendence will heal over time. Magic will recover. The scars of the war will remain, but the world itself will endure. And the merged being that I become will serve as an eternal guardian, holding back the void, ensuring that reality continues." "Will you be conscious?" Luminous asked. "Will you be aware in the between space, or will it be like sleep?" The White Mage answered this time. "We will be aware. We will exist in a state of eternal meditation, neither fully awake nor fully asleep. We will perceive time differently than you do. 1,000 years might feel like a moment, or a moment might feel like an eternity. but we will be there, watching, guarding, ensuring that the boundary holds." "Can you ever return?" Evan asked. Both the Black Mage and the White Mage shook their heads in unison. "No," they said together. "Once we enter the between space, we cannot leave it. To do so would be to abandon our post, to allow the void to creep in. We will be there until the natural end of reality, whenever and however that may come." The ritual circle was complete. The Black Mage and the White Mage positioned themselves at its center, facing each other. The heroes took their places at key points around the circle's perimeter, ready to channel their power into stabilizing the ritual. "Before we begin," Phantom said, "I want to ask, do you have any regrets? If you could go back and change what happened, would you?" The Black Mage and White Mage both smiled, and when they spoke, their voices harmonized perfectly, already beginning to merge. "We would change many things, but not the core of what happened. The journey, however painful, brought us to this moment, to this understanding. Sometimes wisdom can only be purchased through suffering. Sometimes you must be broken before you can truly be whole." Mercedes raised her hands, beginning to channel her power. "Then let us finish this. Let us bring you home." The ritual began. Energy flowed from the heroes into the circle, stabilizing the space within it. The Black Mage and White Mage began to glow, one with darkness, one with light. They reached out to each other, their hands meeting in the center of the circle, and the moment they touched, the process of reunification truly began. It was like watching two drops of water merge, but infinitely more complex. The Black Mage and White Mage began to flow into each other, their forms becoming indistinct, blending together. The darkness and light did not mix into gray, but instead formed a pattern, like the swirl of a yin-yang symbol, constantly shifting and changing. As they merged, the Black Mage simultaneously began the process of transcendence. The throne room started to fracture around them, reality itself cracking as he attempted to step outside it. The heroes could see impossible vistas through the cracks, the void beyond existence, the space where reality ended and unreality began. The merged being that was forming struggled to maintain coherence in two states simultaneously, rejoining while also attempting to transcend. Energy crackled and arced wildly. The throne room shook. The heroes poured more power into the ritual, anchoring it, keeping it stable against forces that wanted to tear everything apart. And then, for just a moment, the merged being achieved consciousness. It opened eyes that held both infinite darkness and brilliant light, and it looked at the heroes with an expression of profound gratitude and equally profound sorrow. "Thank you," it said in a voice that was neither the Black Mage's nor the White Mage's, but something new, "for showing us the way, for refusing to give up, for believing that even the fallen could be redeemed. We will hold the line. We will guard the boundary. We will be the eternal sentinel so that you and all who come after can live in the imperfect but precious reality that exists." The merged being took one final step, and it was neither forward nor backward, neither up nor down, but in a direction that had no name in the language of reality. It stepped into the between space, and as it did, it began to crystallize, its form becoming fixed, eternal, unchanging. The cracks in reality began to seal themselves, the merged being's presence in the between space preventing the void from entering. The throne room stopped shaking. The wild energies calmed. The ritual circle faded, its purpose fulfilled. And in the space where the Black Mage and White Mage had stood, there was now only emptiness. They were gone, passed into a state of existence that the heroes could perceive only dimly, a presence at the edge of their consciousness that felt like a warm hand on the shoulder, a gentle voice saying, "I am here, I am watching, you are safe." The heroes collapsed, exhausted beyond measure, but triumphant. They had done it. They had saved the world, not by destroying the Black Mage, but by helping him find redemption, by reuniting him with the part of himself he had lost so long ago. Chapter 28. The Aftermath. The fortress of Tenebris began to collapse the moment the merged being left reality. Without the Black Mage's power to sustain it, the impossible structure could not maintain its existence. The heroes and the Alliance soldiers within it fled, racing through corridors that were dissolving around them, fighting past monsters that were coming apart at the seams. They emerged into the Esfera, and from there began the long journey back through the arcane river regions to the normal world. It was a journey of celebration and mourning. Celebration that they had won. Mourning for those who had not survived to see this victory. When they finally crossed back over the arcane river and returned to Maple World proper, they found the world changed. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over everything since the Black Mage's return was gone. People reported feeling lighter, freer, as if a burden they hadn't known they were carrying had been lifted. The Black Mage's commanders, freed from their master's binding, faced different fates. Hilla, stripped of her necromantic powers, was captured and imprisoned. She spent years in confinement before eventually being released under strict supervision. She would spend the rest of her long life trying to atone for what she had done, though she would never fully escape the guilt. Magnus, true to his pragmatic nature, offered his services to the Alliance. His strategic brilliance was too valuable to waste, and after much debate, he was allowed to join as a commander, though always watched carefully for signs of betrayal that never came. Damien underwent a longer and more painful redemption. With Aran's help, he confronted the rage and pain that had consumed him, working through centuries of trauma and guilt. It was a process that would take decades, but slowly, painfully, the demon began to remember what it had been like to be a hero. Lotus and Orchid, free of the Black Mage's control and their cybernetic enhancements removed or deactivated, became advocates for those who had been victimized by the Black Mage's forces. They worked to help others who had been transformed or corrupted find their way back to themselves. Gwaru simply disappeared into the wilderness. Reports would surface occasionally of a massive creature helping travelers in distress or protecting villages from monster attacks. But whether it was truly Gwaru or just a legend, no one could say for certain. The heroes themselves faced the question of what to do with the rest of their lives. They had given everything to fight the Black Mage, and now that fight was over. What came next? Mercedes returned to EunWol and resumed her rule, but she was changed by her experiences. She opened the Forest Kingdom to the outside world, establishing formal alliances and trade relationships that would have been unthinkable before. The elves would no longer isolate themselves, but would take an active role in the wider world. Aran traveled, seeking out other warriors to train and teach. She established a school of combat that combined the ancient techniques of her people with modern innovations. Students came from across Maple World to learn from the legendary hero, and she found satisfaction in passing on her skills to a new generation. Phantom struggled the most with peace. He had spent centuries as an active thief, and then as a spy, always moving, always scheming. A world without conflict left him feeling adrift. But gradually he found a new purpose in using his skills to recover lost artifacts and stolen treasures, returning them to their rightful owners. And he continued to hope that someday Mercedes would remember what they had meant to each other. Luminous dedicated himself to teaching the next generation of mages the delicate balance between light and darkness. He established a magical academy where students could learn to wield both without being consumed by either. He also served as an advisor to the Alliance, helping them prepare for future threats. Evan and his dragon became wandering heroes, traveling from place to place and helping those in need. They maintained the Dragon Master tradition while also adapting it for the modern age. Evan would eventually take on students of his own, ensuring that the bond between humans and dragons would continue. Shade worked to preserve the memory of EunWol, to ensure that the forgotten hero would not be forgotten forever. He compiled records, shared stories, and gradually, people began to remember the sixth hero. It was slow work, fighting against the very nature of EunWol's sacrifice, but Shade was patient and determined. Chapter 29. The New Age. The years following the Black Mage's defeat came to be known as the Age of Unity. The Grand Alliance did not dissolve after the war, but instead evolved into a permanent institution, A council where the various kingdoms and factions of Maple World could come together to address common concerns. Under Mercedes's leadership, with input from the other heroes and the leaders of the major powers, the Alliance established protocols for cooperation, mutual defense, and conflict resolution. It wasn't perfect. There were still disputes, still conflicts, still moments when the Alliance seemed on the verge of falling apart. But it endured. The Empress Cygnus, who had played such a crucial role in the war, grew into one of the most respected leaders in Maple World. Her Cygnus Knights became a model for other military organizations, combining martial prowess with ethical conduct in public service. The Resistance, no longer needing to operate in the shadows, transitioned into a peacekeeping force that handled threats too subtle or too unusual for conventional militaries. Many of their members became adventurers and explorers, pushing the boundaries of the known world and discovering new lands and new peoples. Magic, which had been diminished for so long by the drain of the Black Mage's seal, began to flourish again. Mages reported being able to perform feats that had been impossible for centuries. New forms of magic were discovered or rediscovered. The magical arts entered a golden age. But perhaps the most significant change was in how people thought about heroism and sacrifice. The story of the heroes who had fought the Black Mage became the foundational legend of the new age, told and retold in countless variations. But the version that endured, the one that became canonical, was notable for its complexity. It didn't portray the Black Mage as a simple villain, but as a tragic figure, a hero who became so focused on preventing suffering that he lost sight of why suffering mattered. It didn't portray the heroes as flawless champions, but as flawed individuals who struggled with doubt, fear, and their own limitations before finding the courage to do what was necessary. The story emphasized that redemption was always possible, that even the fallen could find their way back, that mercy and understanding could achieve what force alone could not. Children grew up learning not just that the heroes had been powerful, but that they had been compassionate, that Mercedes had shown strategic brilliance, but also diplomatic wisdom, that Aran had been a fierce warrior, but also someone who saw the humanity in her enemies, that Phantom had been a skilled thief, but also someone willing to sacrifice everything for others, that Luminous had balanced light and darkness, but also balanced justice and mercy, that Evan had inherited a legacy and adapted it to new circumstances, that Shade had fought to be remembered while honoring those who had been forgotten. And they learned about the White Mage and the Black Mage, about how they had been one person who split apart and then came together again, about how the greatest battle had not been between good and evil, but between different visions of what good meant. Chapter 30. Be Eternal Vigil. At the edge of the arcane river, where reality met unreality, there existed a space that only the most powerful mages could perceive. It was here that the merged being kept its eternal vigil, holding the boundary between existence and the void. Those who had the sensitivity to perceive this space reported seeing a figure that constantly shifted between forms, sometimes appearing as the White Mage, sometimes as the Black Mage, most often as something that was neither and both. The figure never moved from its position, never wavered in its duty. But it was not unconscious. Those who claimed to have perceived the merged being said they could feel its awareness, its consciousness spanning vast distances and times. It watched over Maple World, not intervening. It could not, bound as it was to the between space, but observing, aware, caring. Some claimed they could feel its emotions, satisfaction when people showed kindness to each other, sorrow when they caused unnecessary harm, joy when they overcame obstacles through cooperation and understanding, concern when they repeated the mistakes of the past. The merged being became known as the Transcendent One, or sometimes simply the Guardian. Temples were built in its honor, though the being itself neither encouraged nor discouraged worship. It simply was, a constant presence at the edge of reality, fulfilling the purpose it had chosen. Luminous, in his later years, made a final pilgrimage to the edge of the arcane river to commune with the Transcendent One. He spent days in meditation, his consciousness touching the vast awareness of his former teacher. When he returned, he was asked what he had experienced, what the Transcendent One had said to him. Luminous smiled, and there were tears in his eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. The Transcendent One is at peace. It exists in a state beyond our comprehension, but I felt its contentment. It told me that it had finally found what it had been searching for all along, not the power to perfect the world, but the acceptance of the world's imperfections. Not the ability to prevent all suffering, but the understanding of why suffering exists and why it matters. Not the certainty of a predetermined outcome, but the beauty of an uncertain future. Did it have any message for us? Someone asked. Luminous nodded. It said, live, make mistakes and learn from them, suffer and grow stronger. Love and risk heartbreak, create beauty that will not last forever, fight for causes that may not succeed. This is what it means to be alive in a reality that is flawed but precious. This is what I protect. This is what makes the eternal vigil worthwhile. Epilogue. The chronicle continues. And so the story of the Black Mage, the White Mage, and the heroes who stood against the darkness comes to its conclusion. But in another sense, the story never ends. It continues in every person who chooses compassion over cruelty, in every hero who stands up against injustice, in every soul who looks at the world's flaws and decides to make things better rather than give up. The heroes themselves eventually passed from the world, as all things must. Mercedes, who had already lived for millennia, continued for centuries more before finally choosing to enter an eternal sleep, her duty fulfilled. Aran fought her last battle, defending a village from a monster horde, falling in combat as a warrior should, her polearm still in her hands. Phantom disappeared one day, leaving behind only a note that said he had found one final treasure to steal and would not be returning. And some whispered that in his final moments he had reunited with Mercedes in whatever realm exists beyond death. Luminous lived longest of all the heroes, serving as a teacher and guide until he was ancient even by magical standards. When he finally felt his time approaching, he made one last journey to the edge of the arcane river and stepped into the between space, joining the Transcendent One and its eternal vigil. Some say that if you concentrate very carefully at the boundary between reality and unreality, you can perceive not one figure but two, master and student reunited, standing watch together over the world they both loved. Evan's dragon outlived its master by centuries, as dragons do, and passed the Dragon Master legacy to a new generation before finally returning to the wild to live out its final years in peace. Shade achieved his goal of preserving EunWol's memory, and when his work was complete, he too faded from the world, though whether he died or simply returned to the Fox spirits, no one could say. The world they saved continued, imperfect and chaotic and beautiful. New threats arose, and new heroes emerged to face them. The alliance they had built evolved and adapted to changing circumstances. The peace they had won was not eternal, no peace ever is, but it endured long enough for generations to grow up knowing security and hope. And at the edge of reality, the Transcendent One maintained its vigil, the eternal guardian, the being that had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest power is the power to accept what cannot be changed, that sometimes the greatest wisdom is knowing when to protect rather than perfect, that sometimes the greatest love is allowing the beloved to be flawed and free rather than perfect and controlled. This is the chronicle of light and shadow, of destruction and redemption, of heroes who fought not just with weapons and magic, but with compassion and understanding. This is the story of the White Mage who became the Black Mage and then became something greater than either. A guardian standing between the world and the void, ensuring that life, in all its messy, painful, beautiful complexity, could continue. The chronicle is ended, but the story continues. It continues in you, in me, in everyone who hears this tale and takes from it the lesson that even the darkest fall can lead to redemption, that even the most flawed world is worth protecting, that even the longest struggle can end in peace. The Black Mage's saga is complete, but the saga of Mapleworld goes on, as it always has and always will, imperfect and precious, flawed and worthy of love, existing because a guardian stands watch at reality's edge and says to the void, not today, not ever. This world with all its faults deserves to exist, and I will ensure that it does. This world with all its faults May those who hear it find in it hope, wisdom, and the courage to protect what they love, even when the cost is great. May they remember that heroes are not those who never fall, but those who rise again after falling. May they understand that the world's imperfections are not reasons to despair, but opportunities to show compassion, courage, and love. The vigil continues. The world endures. And somewhere at the boundary between existence and non-existence, the Transcendent One watches over us all, a silent guardian, a watchful protector, a beacon of hope that even the deepest darkness can be transformed into light. This is the end of our tale, but not the end of the story. The story never ends. It continues in every heart that refuses to give up, in every hand that reaches out to help another, in every soul that looks at an imperfect world and chooses to make it better rather than abandon it. The chronicle of light and shadow is complete. Remember it well and carry its lessons forward into whatever battles and struggles you may face. For as long as there are those who remember what the heroes fought for and why the Transcendent, one keeps its eternal vigil. The light will never be completely extinguished, and the darkness will never completely triumph. The tale is told. The chronicle is ended. But the adventure, the grand adventure of existence in a flawed but wondrous reality, continues forever.